At the beginning of Chapter 1, a soldier held a cigar in his hand, muttering that it was useless. In his mind, there was absolutely no way they could win. Nearby, another soldier sat quietly in a corner, looking completely helpless as the dragons continued to approach. The setting was within the military empire known as Dragania. At the center of the empire's power stood what people praised as the strongest dragons of the era. With Dragania's army of seemingly invincible dragon riders, other countries had been invaded one after another at incredible speed. The people admired the dragon riders greatly, gathering in crowds with awe in their eyes. In the middle of the crowd, a single fly drifted away and flew straight toward a certain man. The fly buzzed quietly beside him, almost as if whispering something. The man simply thought that it must be nice. Dragon riders always received so much attention. From somewhere nearby, the sharp screeching cries of imprisoned dragons echoed through the air. Outside, unfamiliar characters were written across a large sign. The sign pointed toward enormous doors ahead, where vines slowly climbed the tall pillars surrounding them. The following day, Breed Stallion, the main character, was dismissed from his job. The news left Breed confused. The word fired echoed in his mind as he tried to process it. The man standing in front of him believed Breed should already understand the situation. The Empire of Dragania had rapidly conquered the surrounding nations through overwhelming advances. At this point, only small countries remained, and they were considered too insignificant to bother invading. Because of that, the higher authorities had decided that the empire no longer needed as many troops. To them, this was simply a matter of clearing away unnecessary clutter. Breed stood there without speaking. Part of him had already expected something like this. Over time, the number of dragon trainers had been steadily decreasing. The job of a dragon trainer was harsh from the start. The work often meant getting covered in dirt or suffering injuries. But the worst part was the smell of dragons that clung to the body. No matter what he did, the scent never fully disappeared. Anyone who carried that smell around had little hope of becoming popular with girls. Those who chose to quit the job often walked away with a strange look of relief on their faces. Back in the conversation, Breed wondered if it was truly acceptable for him to leave just like that. From the other side, the reaction seemed almost impressed, as if his willingness to step away was admirable. The belief was that the soldiers could simply feed the dragons and clean up after them on their own. Breed knew very well that taking care of dragons was far from simple. Every single dragon had its own unique personality, and each one required careful attention. There was still more to consider. The dragon shelters constantly needed repairs, and the health of the dragons had to be carefully managed. They had to be fed regularly and given proper medicine when needed. Feeding and cleaning several hundred dragons was not something that could be done in a single day. At that moment, there was no dragon trainer left other than Breed. Before Breed could finish explaining everything, the man suddenly grabbed his clothes and suggested that they could simply slaughter enough dragons until the remaining number became manageable. Breed argued that they could not easily reduce the number of dragons in the Dragon Rider army, especially since that army had become the symbol of Dragania. The king responded by forcefully shoving Breed aside, showing that he truly did not care about the matter. To him, the situation was simple. Breed must already understand how expensive it was to maintain dragons. In his view, dragons were nothing more than creatures that devoured money. Because of their enormous size, they required massive shelters. When they became sick, the medical costs were extremely high. If a dragon died despite treatment, another one had to be raised, and that process was expensive as well. Even after doing everything possible, there were times when dragons still died. In Breed's mind, no one understood the high cost of raising dragons better than he did. He tightened his grip on the edge near the window and quietly looked outside. In his thoughts, if losing his job could somehow help save the dragons' lives, then perhaps that was the only thing someone like him could do. Someone as insignificant as himself. Breed eventually accepted the decision. He took out a worn and rugged book, explaining that it contained everything needed to properly care for dragons. It was a complete collection of the knowledge required for raising them. However, the book carried a strong smell. The king immediately brushed Breed's hand aside, making it clear that the book was unnecessary. To him, Breed was nothing more than a lonely breeder, someone from whom there was nothing worth learning. Breed quietly reflected on the past. It had already been 20 years since he started working there. During that time, he had been scolded and shouted at countless times. Even so, they had always entrusted him with the work of caring for the dragons. In his own way, he had always believed that this was how they showed their appreciation for him. But that had never truly been the case. All the work Breed had done could have been handled by someone else. Anyone at all could have taken his place and done the same tasks. Breed slowly curled his hand into a tight fist. As he stepped forward, the king began to feel uneasy. Then a sudden rattling sound echoed in the room. The king became alarmed as the noise continued. Breed calmly lifted the king's seat slightly in order to retrieve the rugged book that had fallen beneath it. After picking it up, he made it clear that the book was important to him and that he wanted to take it back. Once he had it, Breed gently lowered the seat again, leaving the king unsteady and wobbling in place. With the book secured, Breed turned and began to walk away, offering a simple wish for the king's good health. Outside the building, the screeching cries of dragons echoed from within the dragon facility. As Breed moved along, two soldiers approached him and called out to him casually, addressing him like an old man. They quickly asked if he had been fired. One of the soldiers remarked that Breed never had any real skills in the first place. In their view, that was the reason he had been stuck doing this kind of work for so long, until he ended up smelling terrible because of the dragons. The soldier casually added that if they had been the ones doing the job, they would have finished the work quickly and then gone out to spend their time playing around with girls. Breed calmly asked if it would be all right to leave the dragons in their care. One of the soldiers brushed it off, telling him not to worry about it. The other confidently stated that if someone as old as Breed could handle the job, then it would be nothing more than an easy task for them. In Breed's thoughts, these were the same ill-mannered men who had pushed all the difficult work onto him. In a way, perhaps it was fortunate that he would no longer have to deal with them again. One of the soldiers wondered if simply giving a dragon a strong kick would make it obey. The other soldier agreed without hesitation. To demonstrate, the second soldier suddenly kicked the dragon directly in the face. The dragon remained silent. Breed quietly observed the situation. Dragons possessed strong scales and powerful muscles. This particular dragon also had a calm temperament, so a single kick was not enough to provoke it into anger. Breed decided that for now, he would think about himself. Perhaps he could look for work that did not involve dragons. In his mind, several possibilities appeared. He imagined working in a small store, or maybe helping in the fields. The transportation business crossed his thoughts as well, and even the idea of becoming a cook. Trying something completely new might not be so bad. Just imagining these possibilities made him feel unexpectedly excited. One of the soldiers nearby noticed his expression and questioned him, wondering what the old man was thinking about and whether something was bothering him. Breed suddenly realized that he had been glaring. He was about to deny it, but before he could react, the soldier cursed at him and pulled out his sword, acting as if Breed had challenged him and was asking to be killed. At that moment, the quiet dragon beside them slowly opened its mouth. The dragon's expression turned menacing as it stared directly at the two soldiers. The soldiers immediately froze in fear. In the next moment, the dragon clamped its jaws down on the soldier's sword. The two soldiers quickly ran away, shouting that Breed should train the dragons properly next time. In Breed's mind, he had already quit the job anyway. The dragon simply huffed softly. Breed reached out and gently patted the dragon. He silently thanked the dragon for helping him in that moment. Before leaving for good, Breed decided that he would at least say goodbye to the dragons he had taken care of for so long. He walked to the first dragon stable, then moved on to the next one. As he passed by, the dragons quietly watched him. Eventually, he headed toward a different place within the castle. This one was the last. The room was dim, lit only by candles. It was the oldest dragon shelter in Dragania, built around the same time the Dragon Rider army had first been formed. Inside the shelter, there was only a single dragon. That dragon was chained. Breed called out to Barbarossa. Barbarossa responded by exhaling heavily toward him. She was the oldest dragon in Dragania, known as Barbarossa. Among all the dragons there, she stood as their leader. Although she had already retired, stories claimed that the heroic king who founded the Empire of Dragania once rode this very dragon into battle. Barbarossa fixed her gaze on Breed. Slowly, she lifted herself and sat upright. Breed was surprised by the sight, since Barbarossa was usually always lying down. Now she began to growl softly. Breed scratched his nose, feeling as though Barbarossa could see straight through him. He explained that he had come there today to say goodbye. Barbarossa's eyes widened slightly. Breed noticed the change in her expression and felt surprised by it. He continued explaining that he was being fired because of cost-cutting decisions. After everything he had done while taking care of the dragons, it was difficult for him to believe that this was how things would end. Barbarossa let out a low grunt, and Breed gently patted her nose. He went on, saying that after he was gone, he hoped Barbarossa would look after the other dragons for him. Since she was intelligent, he believed she would manage just fine. However, the dragon slowly shook her head. Breed became confused, wondering if she was worried about him. Barbarossa continued staring at Breed. In Breed's mind, many thoughts passed through at once. He remembered being looked down on by his coworkers. He remembered how hopeless he had always been with girls. All the work he had done over the years had never received any recognition. It felt as if his entire life would pass by without his efforts ever being rewarded. Yet, at this moment, a dragon he had cared for was showing concern for him. That alone made him feel as if all the pain he had gone through had been worth it. Breed sniffled quietly. A curse slipped from him as tears began to form. He felt that if he stayed there any longer, he might truly start crying. Turning around, he prepared to leave and silently wished for Barbarossa's good health. But Barbarossa suddenly growled and rose to her full height. She released a powerful roar that caused even Breed to flinch. When Breed turned back, he was shocked to see the chains around her beginning to crack. Barbarossa's roar echoed throughout the entire place. Without warning, Barbarossa leaned forward and clamped her jaws onto Breed's clothes. Some time later, an angry voice could be heard nearby. It was the same soldier from earlier, still cursing as he swore that he would never forgive that old man and his dragon. In his anger, he vowed that he would show those dragons who was in control. Suddenly, the ground began to rumble beneath their feet. Moments later, part of the structure collapsed with a loud crash. The soldier reacted in shock as the chaos unfolded. At the same time, Breed found himself thrown behind Barbarossa's massive body. He tried to stop her, attempting to calm her down. But Barbarossa roared once more and forced her way out. She moved toward the other dragon shelters and began freeing the dragons one after another. Soon, dragons started emerging outside. More and more of them came out, their loud roars filling the air. Each step of the dragons made the ground tremble. The dragons began following behind Barbarossa. Breed felt panic rising inside him. One after another, the dragons from the sheds were coming out. It seemed as though they were truly planning to leave together with him. In Breed's thoughts, if this continued, the guards would surely be alerted. The guards soon noticed a strange rumbling sound and began wondering about its cause. Before they could react, the dragons suddenly crashed through the gates. The massive creatures rushed outside, breaking free from the enclosures. Breed could only cling tightly to Barbarossa's back as everything unfolded. He had no idea what was happening anymore. The next day arrived with bright sunlight and the soft chirping of birds. Breed slowly opened his eyes. Stretching his body, he murmured to himself about what felt like a good nap. As he looked around, dragons were everywhere. They were scattered across the area, resting or standing nearby. Breed looked around again, trying to understand where exactly he was. Later, he walked toward a nearby source of water. While standing there, he thought back to the times during his training when he had traveled outside and explored parts of the country. Because of that, the landscape felt somewhat familiar to him. If he had to guess, they were somewhere in the northern region. The air was colder than usual for this time of year. Dragons struggled in colder environments, and even the Empire had always found it difficult to launch attacks in these regions. That made him wonder why the dragons had come all the way here. In Breed's mind, only one explanation made sense. The dragons might have believed that he was fleeing from the Empire. Leaving the Empire's territory was certainly good in one way, but surviving here would not be easy. Finding enough food would be a serious problem. Dragons consumed enormous amounts of food every day. They could eat several kilograms of grass and drink large amounts of water daily. In this cold region, the grass was shorter and less abundant. With hundreds of dragons gathered in one place, the grass would disappear quickly. In fact, the area they had just passed through had already turned into a barren wasteland. Still, these dragons had followed him, trusting him completely. Breed knew he could not allow them to starve. He needed to find a solution somehow. He told the dragon beneath him to move slightly to the left. As he looked ahead, something caught his attention. It was the nest of the Grand Python. The Grand Python was a massive poisonous snake capable of swallowing a baby dragon whole. It was a dangerous monster, one that even a strong dragon had to fight with full effort. Because of that, it was best not to provoke it. At the moment, Breed only had the most minimal healing supplies with him. All he truly needed was a place where he and the dragons could rest. Then Breed heard something. Looking up, he noticed a flying dragon in the sky. In the dragon's claws was the Grand Python. At first, it seemed as if the dragon had been hunting. But something about the situation felt strange. Suddenly, the flying dragon released the python. Breed noticed that the dragon was staring directly in his direction. Without warning, the flying dragon descended and slammed down in front of him. Breed was caught off guard. A rattling sound followed, and he realized that someone above the dragon was controlling it. There was a rider. Breed wondered if this presence had been the uneasy feeling he sensed earlier. If the dragon had been wild, its movements would have been far more natural. From above, the rider muttered in irritation after noticing that Breed had managed to dodge the attack. The rider intended not to miss the next strike. Breed tried to speak, but the rider launched another attack before he could say anything. He questioned why he was being attacked. The rider pulled on the reins again and identified Breed as someone from Dragania's Dragon Corps. From the rider's perspective, members of that corps were not permitted to trespass in this territory. At that moment, Breed understood the situation. He had made a serious mistake. Being outside the Empire meant that he had unknowingly entered the territory of another country. Dragania had already warned neighboring nations about possible invasions. On top of that, Breed had arrived with hundreds of dragons behind him. He attempted to explain that everything was a misunderstanding and asked the rider to listen. However, the writer dismissed the idea of any discussion, believing there was no point in arguing. In Breed's mind, the opponent was powerful enough to defeat a grand python with ease. Still, he could not allow himself to die because of a misunderstanding. Breed called out for Barbarossa. The flying dragon suddenly flinched. A loud explosion echoed through the area. The flying dragon let out a piercing scream. The opponent showed clear surprise. In Breed's mind, the flying dragon's charge was extremely powerful, but its attack patterns were limited. He directed Barbarossa to attack from the right. From the opponent's perspective, Breed appeared foolish for giving commands out loud where they could easily be heard. In the next moment, Barbarossa suddenly struck the flying dragon. The opponent quickly ordered her dragon to stay alert for an attack from the right. However, the dragon suddenly jolted in confusion. Barbarossa slammed into the flying dragon again. The opponent was shocked. The other dragon had not followed the command that had been heard. Then the realization came. Breed's true instructions had not come from his voice at all. They had come through signals from his hands. Breed praised Barbarossa, satisfied that everything had gone exactly according to plan. In his thoughts, a feint like that, used to dodge an opponent's attacks, was only possible because the dragon beside him was Barbarossa. The opponent gave a small smirk. But then the writer's body suddenly wobbled. In her mind, she realized she had failed. As she lost balance and began to fall, Breed quickly moved and caught her. He released a small sigh of relief. If she had been injured, it could have caused another misunderstanding. His attention then shifted toward the flying dragon lying on the ground. Something caught his eye. It looked as though the dragon had been bitten by the grand python. The dragon's left leg had changed color. The poison needed to be removed immediately. Looking around, Breed noticed a sharp object nearby and picked it up. The opponent reacted in panic as he took it. Breed simply indicated that he would borrow it for a moment. He then used the blade to cut open the dragon's foot. Blood immediately began to gush out. The dragon thrashed violently and swung its tail. The tail struck Breed directly on the head. Blood began to drip from his head. Despite that, Breed calmly assured the dragon that everything would be fine and that it would recover soon. The dragon stared closely at him. Nearby, the opponent watched everything that was happening. It was then explained that the dragon had been poisoned. The opponent observed that the dragon appeared to be in a very bad condition. Breed noted that even though dragons were sturdy creatures, they should never become too confident. There were many things in nature capable of killing them. Realizing he was still holding the sword, Breed returned it to the opponent and expressed his thanks. Only then did the situation suddenly dawn on him. This knight had originally been trying to kill him. Sweat slowly formed on his face. Suddenly, the opponent burst into laughter and reassured him not to worry. The knight removed her helmet, acknowledging that she had been the one who failed. She acknowledged that she had lost. Breed stood there in surprise after realizing that the knight before him was actually a woman. The woman openly admitted that bringing down a flying dragon using an earth dragon was an impressive display of skill. She also recognized how Breed had managed to treat the dragon's wound, something she herself had not even noticed earlier. What stood out even more to her was the fact that Breed had returned her sword without hesitation, despite the fact that she had just tried to attack him. To her, that kind of action suggested a strong confidence. She then expressed regret for her earlier rudeness and mentioned that, as a princess from the countryside, she did not know much about the outside world. Breed was about to respond, but the words caught in his mind. A princess. The woman quietly realized that she had forgotten to properly introduce herself. Her name was Fiana Shin Levatin, the first princess of the northern country known as Levatin. In Breed's thoughts, the situation felt unbelievable. A princess had gone out alone to hunt a creature as dangerous as the grand python. On top of that, she had done it without any escort at all. The behavior struck him as reckless. Fiana continued speaking, acknowledging that since she had lost to him, there was no room left to resist. In her mind, if he wished to avoid further bloodshed, he could simply take her back to Dragania as she was. However, she still hoped that he would spare her people. Breed felt a sudden sense of confusion. It seemed clear to him that she had misunderstood something important. Fiana continued with her words, promising that she would allow him to do whatever he wished with her. She even stated that she would not object if he decided to make her his mistress. Breed reacted with clear surprise at the mention of becoming his mistress. Fiana spoke calmly, viewing the situation as something that could be treated as a blessing in disguise. She noted that she was not married, and although she might be close to his age, she could assure him of her physical strength and endurance. She waited for his response. From her perspective, instead of ending her life immediately, there might still be room left for negotiation. Breed reached out and grabbed her, urging her to calm down. For a moment, silence settled between them. He then asked whether she would at least listen to his explanation. Later, Fiana finally came to understand what had actually happened. Breed was simply a dragon trainer from Dragania who had been dismissed and forced to leave. When he was about to depart, the dragons had followed him on their own. Even so, the idea of banishing someone with such skill seemed unbelievable to her. She wondered if Dragania was being governed by complete fools. Realizing her mistake, she lowered her head and expressed her apology. Breed quickly told her to stop, pointing out that a princess should not be bowing to someone like him. Fiana scrunched her face at his reaction. Breed found himself wondering about the strange expression she had made. After that, Fiana asked for his name. He introduced himself as Breed. Fiana then told him that he should stop putting himself down so much. From her perspective, there were not many people in the world who possessed the kind of skills he had shown. She also admitted that her previous image of Dragania's legendary hero king might have been wrong. Breed's eyes widened slightly at that remark. He clarified that just because the situation had turned out this way did not mean he was leading the dragons. It was unfortunate, but he considered himself nothing more than a normal dragon trainer. In fact, he saw himself more as a caretaker than anything else. Fiana glanced at him for a moment. Then she smiled. She explained that, as he might already know, Levatin was a weak country that could disappear at any time. Because of that, she constantly searched for ways to protect and strengthen her beloved homeland. Becoming skilled enough to ride a flying dragon required intense training, and even monster hunting had its limits. No matter how much she thought about it, her country simply did not have enough time or people to rely on. After considering everything, she felt that perhaps this meeting was some form of fate. If Breed was willing, she proposed that he come to her country together with the dragons. Breed understood that she was essentially offering him a job. Fiana confirmed the idea. With so many dragons on their side, the strength of her country would increase significantly. From her perspective, it was not a bad offer for someone who had just been banished from his homeland. Breed considered the proposal carefully. It was certainly an incredible offer. However, there was still the problem of housing and feeding the dragons. The same concern applied to himself as well. Breed hesitated. Fiana wondered if that meant he was refusing. Breed clarified that he was not rejecting the offer. He intended to accept it, but there was something she needed to understand first. There were hundreds of dragons involved. Fiana assured him that food and shelter would be provided. However, Breed grew serious and explained that she was misunderstanding something important. Dragons could produce an extremely strong smell. Fiana looked stunned by that statement. Breed explained further that she was underestimating the level of care required to manage hundreds of dragons. At the moment, it was manageable because the dragons were outside. But if they were kept indoors, the dragon's waste would quickly contaminate the ground and create a powerful odor. Levatin did not have facilities prepared for housing hundreds of dragons. While such facilities were being built, the entire country would likely be filled with that smell. It was not something that could be taken lightly. Because of that, Breed felt both happy and hesitant about accepting her offer. Suddenly, Fiana stepped closer to him and leaned forward to sniff him. Breed jolted in surprise. Fiana continued sniffing him repeatedly before giving a small smirk. She soon understood what he meant. The smell was indeed strong enough to make her feel slightly dizzy. In her observation, dragon trainers clearly did not have many opportunities to bathe properly. The dizziness lingered for a moment. Still, she chuckled lightly. Despite everything, she admitted that she did not truly dislike the smell. A smell of that level was not a serious problem for someone like her. As a princess, she would make sure that the necessary facilities were prepared so her weak country could survive. For that to happen, they needed dragons. And they needed Breed, someone capable of controlling them. She extended her hands slightly and made it clear that she truly wanted him to come. Breed stood there in surprise. In his mind, he felt that he should be grateful to her simply for offering him a job. Memories resurfaced. He remembered people mocking him, telling him he should be thankful just to have work. Some called him a salary thief. Others complained about how badly he smelled. Many had told him that he should never leave the dragon sheds. Even at the end, while he worked as a dragon trainer, people continued calling him a nuisance. Never once had he been treated as someone important. He had always believed his life would continue in that same way. Now he was hearing something he had never heard before. Someone needed him. For the first time in his 20 years of life, those words were directed toward him. He had once believed that those 20 years had meant nothing, but now he wanted to become useful to her. His emotions overflowed. Tears quietly fell from his eyes. Around him, the dragons watched silently. They were all waiting for Breed's response. At that moment, Barbarossa slowly stepped forward. Breed turned his head and saw the encouraging look in Barbarossa's eyes. Fiana added that if there was anything else Breed needed, she would make sure to provide it. She then asked if there were still any problems remaining. Breed answered that there were none. He declared that Breed's stallion would serve her with complete loyalty. With that, Breed knelt down and accepted her offer, while the many dragons around them looked on. Quick pause. If you're enjoying this, help us reach 1,000 subscribers. One click equals instant power-up. Subscribe now. Back to the story. Fiana was seen riding her flying dragon once again, with Breed beside her. As they approached their destination, Fiana announced that they had arrived. Breed quietly muttered in realization that this was the place called Levatin. Fiana looked ahead and remarked that it was rather a small castle. Breed appeared confused by the comment. Fiana then told him there was no need to think too much about it and simply asked him to take a good look. The castle walls had long since collapsed, leaving only ruins behind. A makeshift bridge had been built in place of what once stood strong. Most of the houses looked worn and run down. Nearly all of the men had perished during the war, and now the people living there were mostly the elderly and women raising their children. Breed wondered if a war had broken out there. Fiana confirmed that it had. Dragonia had invaded when she was still a child. After a long and grueling battle, she had managed to survive. However, her siblings had lost their lives on the battlefield, and the country had been thrown into complete chaos. In the end, the only saving grace was that she remained alive. Because of that, she now carried a single duty: to protect this country at all costs and rule over it. Fiana then called out to Breed and asked if it was really fine to leave the dragons behind like that. Breed explained that he had already told them he would catch up later, so there was no problem. Fiana understood. She mentioned that she could call the dragons back to her with a whistle. However, controlling a dragon from far away was impossible, especially when there were more than 100 dragons involved. Breed's ability in taming dragons truly stood out. As they looked down at the land below, Fiana said that they would be landing soon. The people on the ground watched their arrival. Children quickly noticed and excitedly announced that Princess Fiana had returned. The townspeople welcomed her back warmly. Fiana expressed her thanks to them and mentioned that she had brought many souvenirs for everyone today. Watching the scene, Breed quietly thought that she truly was someone important. An elderly person then stepped forward and asked the princess about the identity of the man named Breed. Breed bowed politely before them and stated that he had yet to introduce himself. He presented his name as Breed. Fiana then explained that Breed was the scout she had personally chosen and described him as an incredible dragon master. She added that a large number of dragons would be arriving there later, which meant things were about to become quite hectic. Breed glanced uneasily at the elderly people around them. He suddenly jolted when he felt a pat on his back. It was Fiana. She told him to relax and assured him that he would surely become a great help to everyone there. Hidden then pushed him forward and urged everyone to return to their work. With that, it was said that the way to the dragon stable needed to be shown to Breed. The two of them walked away while the people continued staring in their direction. Breed quietly remarked that it seemed he was not very welcome. Fiana explained that the place was quite remote and mostly cut off from the outside world. Because of that, the people were naturally wary of outsiders like him. She told him not to worry about it too much, adding that they would eventually accept him once they witnessed his skills. Breed reflected on her words and realized she had a point. Unless he proved himself through his actions, the people would never truly approve of him. Words alone would not accomplish anything. The thought made him realize that he might have been a little naive. Fiana then remarked that despite all of Breed's abilities, he seemed to lack boldness. If he continued acting uncertain, people would start taking him lightly. Breed groaned at the remark. Fiana then suggested that they rehearse right away by having him speak to her as if he were casually talking to a friend. Breed was clearly startled by the suggestion and admitted he was unsure about doing that. Fiana asked what the problem was and told him there was no need to hold back around her. She mentioned that she actually had a rather short temper, making the situation sound even more serious. Looking into her eyes, Breed eventually gave up resisting. Breed acknowledged the request and decided he would stop using honorifics with her. Fiana responded with approval. Even so, Breed admitted that he still felt uncomfortable being that casual with her. Fiana simply smiled and decided to let it slide for the day. However, she warned him to prepare himself, suggesting that before long he would naturally stop being so formal around her. At that moment, Breed suddenly sensed a presence behind him. When he quickly turned around to look, there was no one there. The strange feeling left him wondering. Later, at the dragon stable of the Levatin kingdom, Fiana called out for someone named Minnie. She found it unusual that Minnie was nowhere to be seen, since she was usually always there. Breed wondered if she was referring to the dragon master who worked at the stable. Fiana confirmed that it was indeed her and described Minnie as a remarkably brilliant girl. Minnie was known to be very attached to Fiana, almost like a puppy. The sight of it was quite endearing. In Breed's thoughts, despite what many people believed, there were actually many female dragon riders. Compared to men, dragons tended to take a liking to girls more easily. Because of that, having women among the Dragon Knight Guard was a common sight. Fiana looked around and noted that Minnie was nowhere to be found. She decided that it was not a serious problem since Minnie would likely return soon, so waiting for her would be enough. Breed assumed that Minnie must simply be busy. He assured Fiana that there was no need to worry and that he would just introduce himself to her when the time came. It would not be a big matter. Fiana's eyes widened slightly at that response. She accepted the idea and placed the matter in his hands. Breed confidently indicated that she could rely on him. In Breed's mind, the situation felt clear. Fiana needed his help, and that was the reason he had come there. Words alone would not be enough in that place. His most important task was to earn the approval of the townspeople through his actions. Fiana then mentioned that she had forgotten to tell him something. She leaned slightly behind him and quietly spoke near his ear, revealing that she was fond of men who were good at their work. The sudden closeness left Breed completely startled. After saying that, Fiana wished him good luck and then walked out of the stable. Breed remained there, thinking that the moment had been far too much for his heart to handle. As he looked around the stable, he began wondering what Minnie might be like. Although he had spoken confidently earlier, interacting with people was actually one of his weak points. Fiana had previously mentioned that Minnie seemed to have mellowed out somewhat recently. Even so, Minnie still had a reputation for being a troublemaker who would recklessly ride dragons and leave chaos in her wake. There had even been a time when several people had beaten her out of jealousy because she had been getting along well with another girl. The story only made her seem strangely adorable. The more Breed thought about it, the more worried he became. He quietly muttered to himself, hoping that the two of them would get along well. What he failed to notice was someone already rushing toward him from behind. A sudden presence struck him. Before he could react, a woman landed on the back of his neck and tightly locked her legs around it. The impact made him gasp, but it was already too late. The girl complained about her older sister being so mean. Breed could only grunt under the pressure. The girl continued speaking, expressing irritation that even though Fiana already had her around, she had still been careless enough to bring in a lowly bumpkin. At that moment, Breed realized who the girl was. The girl then made her intention clear. She stated that he did not belong there. If he did not want to get hurt, he should leave that place immediately. Breed's eyes widened as he refused the demand. He made it clear that leaving was not something he could do. He had been employed by Miss Fiana as a dragon master, and he intended to make sure that she would also come to get along with him. With that, he moved and tossed the girl away from him. She landed on a nearby sofa. The girl showed no concern for him at all and insisted that he should simply disappear. Her attitude made it clear that she had no interest in accepting him. The girl was Minnie. Minnie made it known that the dragon stable belonged to her. Breed thought to himself that this must be Minnie. Minnie mentioned that she had already heard the story about Breed being an incredibly skilled dragon master who could tame 100 dragons at the same time. She let out a sigh and dismissed the claim as impossible. According to the general understanding, one dragon master could only tame a single dragon. Yet Breed was claiming that he could control 100 dragons all at once, and even do so remotely. To her, the claim sounded nothing more than boastful nonsense. The idea that he had deceived her older sister with such an outrageous lie only made it worse. She tightened her grip on a pitchfork. Breed quickly tried to stop her and urged her to listen to him first. However, the pitchfork was already thrown in his direction. It missed him, but the force caused the wall behind him to crack. Minnie made it clear one last time that he should leave immediately. Not long after that, Breed was sitting outside the stable. In his thoughts, it felt as though he had been fired once again. Ever since then, he had repeatedly tried to offer his help, but Minnie always snapped back and rejected him. The situation looked bad. By now, the dragons should already be making their way toward the forest. At that moment, an idea came to his mind. Inside the dragon stable, Minnie continued her work, feeding the dragons as part of her chores. While doing so, she quietly complained to herself, expressing her frustration and disbelief at the idea of trusting a dragon master. Suddenly, the door creaked open, making Minnie flinch. When she looked around and saw Breed, irritation immediately returned. Breed explained that she had misunderstood. He made it clear that he was not planning to enter the stable. Instead, he was asking if she would mind if he stayed in the area beyond it. After hearing that, Minnie lowered the pitchfork and put it away. She admitted that she had no idea what he intended to do there, but that particular area was not under her authority. Because of that, he could do whatever he wanted. Breed immediately dashed outside while quietly noting to himself that this was good. Minnie had given her approval. That meant there would be no issue if he went ahead with his plan and showed that he could actually be useful to her. It was also about time for the dragons to arrive. Minnie walked toward the door. Leaning against the wall near where Breed had been, she quietly muttered about how ridiculous it sounded that he claimed to have given instructions to dragons to meet up with him there. Her gaze fixed on Breed with sharp suspicion as she remarked that he should at least keep his lies to a minimum. There was no sound of dragons moving nearby, and not even the tremor of the earth could be felt. If 100 dragons were truly approaching, there should have been at least some sign of it. Yet the surroundings remained quiet. Breed explained that he had instructed the dragons not to make much noise while approaching. Then a heavy thud echoed nearby. When Minnie turned her head to the side, she saw a large dragon standing there, letting out a low growl. Her eyes widened at the sight. One dragon had arrived, and soon after, many more began to appear behind it. Minnie stood there in complete shock. She could see Breed calmly standing in front of them, noting that the dragons had arrived exactly on time and had followed his instruction to approach without making noise. The result appeared exactly as he had planned. Minnie's thoughts raced. The idea that Breed might not have been lying about taming 100 dragons suddenly seemed possible. Even more puzzling was the realization that the dragons had managed to move so quietly. Normally, even the approach of a single dragon would shake the ground and fill the air with roaring that could be heard across the entire village. Yet now, a large number of them had arrived silently. The thought that this man had accomplished such a thing alone was difficult for her to accept. Minnie clenched her teeth and walked straight toward Breed. She reached out and grabbed him by the collar. She acknowledged that his abilities appeared to be genuine and gave him credit for that much. At the same time, it also meant that he must have forced the dragons through extremely harsh training to make them capable of moving like that. From inside the stable, something observed the scene. A dragon watched them quietly while letting out a low growl. Minnie made it clear that she had no trust in dragon masters at all. Breed could not help wondering why she held such deep distrust toward them. Minnie then warned him to wait, determined that she would eventually reveal him as nothing more than a fraud. When Minnie was still a child, she had been fascinated by the dragon masters she read about in children's books. She admired the dragon knights, and the dragon masters who cared for the needs of dragons had been her heroes. Others often looked at her with amusement, yet she could not help it. Watching dragon masters interact with dragons as if they were close companions had always filled her with admiration. Now that she had grown older, however, she believed that those ideas had been a mistake. She told Breed that she was fully aware that he was a highly skilled dragon master. After all, he had just shown that he could control a large number of dragons remotely. But to her, that only meant one thing. In order to achieve something like that, he must have forced the dragons through extremely harsh training. In her mind, he must have done something frightening to them. Breed was stunned by the accusation. At that moment, the door slowly creaked open. Breed tried to stop her and insisted that she had misunderstood. A timid dragon carefully peeked out from the opening. When Breed noticed it, the dragon immediately pulled back and hid again. He also saw that the dragon's body was covered in many scars. Minnie called the dragon by the name Kusuki. She quickly rushed toward it and wrapped her arms around the dragon in a hug. Breed realized that Kusuki must be the dragon's name. Minnie apologized to the dragon, thinking that she had frightened it. She gently told Kusuki to return to the dragon's stable. The dragon glanced toward Breed before moving away. Minnie then reminded Breed that she did not trust him in the slightest and made it clear that he should remember that. She warned him that if he even tried to lay a single finger on her dragons, she would make sure he paid for it. Breed stood there in shock. Afterward, he remained outside, reflecting on what had just happened. The realization that he had been intimidated by a girl younger than him made him feel embarrassed. The thought crossed his mind that he looked completely pathetic. At the same time, he wondered how he was supposed to explain this situation to Miss Fiana. Just then, Fiana suddenly appeared and asked what he had been saying about her. Breed was startled and quickly turned around, only to see Miss Fiana leaning casually against the railings behind him. She explained that her work had already finished for the day, so she had come by to check on him. It became clear that things were not going well for Breed when it came to Minnie. The two of them sat together on a bench. Fiana reflected on the situation, finding it surprising that someone skilled enough to tame 100 dragons would struggle when dealing with a single girl. Breed admitted that Minnie might actually be more difficult to handle than dragons themselves. The thought continued to bother him, and he wondered why Minnie seemed to hold such deep contempt toward dragon masters. Fiana then asked whether he had encountered Kusuki. Breed questioned what that had to do with anything. Fiana explained that Kusuki was the very first dragon Minnie had ever helped hatch. Minnie had also been the one to give the dragon its name, and among all the dragons, it had always been her favorite. However, because it was her first time caring for a dragon, Minnie had pushed herself too hard. Eventually she became ill and remained sick for 3 days. During that time, they had asked a dragon master from the town to look after Kusuki in her place. When Minnie finally recovered and returned, what she saw left a lasting impression. Blood had been dripping across the floor. Kusuki had been chained up and left hanging while badly wounded. The dragon master had stood behind Minnie and explained that the dragon would not stop growling, so he had forced it into submission by whipping it. He had tried to reassure Minnie, claiming that there was no need to worry. According to him, he had simply hit the dragon a little too hard and it had ended up losing consciousness. After that, the man had approached Minnie and asked her to go on a date with him that day. He had claimed that he had done her a favor by looking after the dragon and that it would only be fair for her to return the favor. Before the man could finish what he was saying, Minnie struck him in the face. She then rushed over to Kusuki and quickly removed the chains restraining the dragon. The thought crossed her mind that if she had known something like that would happen, she would never have trusted someone else to take care of Kusuki. To her surprise, Kusuki responded by gently licking her, almost as if trying to comfort her. Minnie called the dragon an idiot in her frustration, wondering why it would be concerned about her instead. Being forced to wear iron shackles across its body, locked inside a cramped stable, deprived of food, and repeatedly whipped whenever it showed resistance, the dragon had slowly become worn down over time. Through that experience, Minnie came to realize that the dragon masters she had once admired so deeply were nothing like the heroes she had seen in children's books. From that day onward, Minnie completely lost her trust in dragon masters. Breed remained silent as he listened. Fiana asked him to forgive Minnie, though she stopped midway and called out to him. At that moment, Breed suddenly remarked that he felt relieved. His reaction was not about Minnie's situation itself. Instead, he explained that he had originally believed Minnie disliked him simply because he smelled unpleasant. Fiana could not hold back her amusement and burst into laughter. The remark had been the last thing she expected to hear from him. Breed wondered if she could really blame him for thinking that way. In his experience, he had never been particularly popular with girls. Fiana apologized while still laughing, admitting that she simply could not contain it. She then asked whether Breed would truly be alright handling the situation, considering that Minnie's resentment toward Dragon Masters ran quite deep. Before she could offer to help him, Breed stood up and immediately refused the idea. To him, asking for her assistance in this matter was completely out of the question. After all, he was someone whom Fiana herself had recognized and trusted. He swung his fist confidently into the air, reminding himself that he was someone in whom the princess had placed her faith. With that in mind, he believed that dealing with Minnie should be a simple task. Later, the two of them walked back toward the dragon stable. Breed gathered himself and looked toward the dragons, asking whether all of them had arrived. He tightened his fist and declared his determination, intending to show Minnie what a true dragon master was capable of. Night had already fallen when Minnie slowly opened her eyes and realized that she had dozed off. Her attention immediately shifted when she noticed that Kusuki was no longer beside her. Startled, she quickly looked around and soon found Kusuki peeking through a small opening in the door, quietly looking outside. Minnie walked over toward the door and wondered what Kusuki was staring at. Through the gap, she saw Breed directing the dragons as they worked. The dragons were carrying logs and various building materials. Piece by piece, they were assembling a structure together. Every dragon was helping with the task. In Minnie's thoughts, the sight was astonishing. It seemed as though that part of the forest had been developed within only a few days. Even the flying dragons were taking part in the work. She reasoned that such progress might be possible if someone had 100 dragons working together. However, giving instructions to that many dragons and keeping them coordinated would normally require a large number of people. Yet Breed was handling everything by himself. The way he worked made it seem as though the dragons were simply extensions of his own will. Her gaze sharpened as she watched him. A low grunt sounded beside her. One of the dragons approached Breed and added another piece of lumber to the growing structure. Even the smaller dragons were following instructions and taking part in the work. Breed himself was also helping alongside them. As Minnie observed the scene more closely, she began to notice something unexpected. The dragons did not appear to resent Breed at all. Instead, it almost seemed as though they trusted him completely. Only then did she realize that Kusuki was no longer beside her. Kusuki had already rushed toward the others. Minnie quickly tried to call Kusuki back, but Breed stepped in front of her and blocked the way. She told him to move aside, explaining that Kusuki was afraid of the other dragons. Ever since that earlier incident, Kusuki had become frightened not only of humans but also of other dragons. Without her nearby, the dragon would be helpless. In her mind, she feared that the other dragons might surround Kusuki and injure him again. Before she could continue, Breed stopped her and urged her to simply watch. Minnie looked at Breed and then turned her gaze forward. What she saw surprised her. Kusuki was interacting peacefully with the other dragons. The dragon appeared genuinely happy among them. Her eyes widened at the sight. Breed then explained that dragons raised closely by humans often fail to interact with other dragons. Over time, they can grow wary and uneasy around their own kind. Dragons needed chances to interact with others of their own kind. Without those opportunities, they would lose the potential to mature and grow properly. Minnie felt uneasy as the realization settled in. The signs had always been there. She often caught Kusuki watching other dragons from a distance. At times, Kusuki seemed wary of them, and deep down she had always sensed that something was not quite right. Her heart began to pound as a troubling thought formed in her mind. It seemed possible that she herself had kept Kusuki separated from the others all this time. Just as she began to blame herself, Breed spoke up and remarked that Kusuki was truly remarkable. Normally, once a dragon lost its trust in people, it would never try to approach them again. Yet Kusuki had still tried, in its own awkward way, to step out of its shell and face Breed directly. Breed looked toward Kusuki as he continued his observation. Kusuki had grown into a very sincere dragon, and that was because Minnie had always faced the dragon honestly. Tears began to fall from Minnie's eyes. At that moment, Breed suddenly clapped his hands once and signaled the dragons to continue their work so they could finish the task. Minnie's eyes widened as she watched. The first thing she noticed was how much the dragons seemed to adore Breed. The sight held her attention completely. In that moment, she realized that she could not compare to him in this regard. One of the dragons even gave Breed a playful bite. As the sun began to rise, the newly built dragon stable stood complete. Breed praised the dragons for their hard work, acknowledging the effort they had put into the task. The dragons responded with low growls. Breed then indicated that he would handle the rest from there and that the dragons should go and get some rest. In his thoughts, he felt confident that a stable of that size would be able to house 100 dragons. He also realized that he still needed to prepare the tools he would require. Breed suddenly began wondering where Minnie had gone. The thought crossed his mind that he might have acted a bit out of line when it came to Kusuki, and he could only hope that Minnie had not become angry because of it. While working, he accidentally struck his hand with the hammer and cut himself. From behind him, Minnie commented that the mistake looked rather clumsy. Breed was surprised by her sudden presence and wondered where she had gone earlier. Minnie explained that she had gone to gather supplies for him. She mentioned that there was no need for him to go out of his way to make everything himself. If he needed anything, he could simply leave it to her. She continued by mentioning the dragon stable. From time to time, she would allow him to go inside. Breed began to wonder if what he was thinking might be correct. However, before he could confirm it, Minnie flinched slightly and her face turned red. She pointed at him in a defensive manner, making it clear that he should not misunderstand the situation. In her mind, she was only helping him because he seemed somewhat useful. It was simply a way to avoid causing trouble for her older sister. Before she could react, Breed reached forward and grabbed her hands in gratitude. Minnie was startled and questioned why he had suddenly taken hold of her hands. Breed quickly pulled away and apologized, realizing that his gloves might still carry a smell from earlier. On top of that, he was drenched in sweat after working so hard. He assumed that Minnie would naturally dislike being touched in that condition. Looking at his rough and rugged hands, Minnie let out a quiet sigh. She thought that he had completely misunderstood the situation. Even so, Breed remained confused. Minnie then turned away while letting out a small chuckle. After a moment, she turned back toward Breed with a smile and regarded him as someone rather strange. Meanwhile, in the Empire of Dragonia, the captain of the Dragon Knights, Sarah Valiaden, delivered her report. She stated that nearly all of the dragons in the stable had escaped, leaving only a few behind. Patrol units had already been dispatched and were currently searching for the missing dragons. The Emperor remained silent as he listened. At his side stood several women. He was Bompard, the ruler of the Dragonia Empire. With a simple gesture, the Emperor signaled for Sarah to continue. She proceeded to explain that they were considering purchasing new dragons. A few agents had already been carefully selected and sent to the commercial city of Zeta. However, given the small number of dragons they still had, the situation remained difficult. Bompard reacted with clear dissatisfaction. The idea seemed to disappoint him. To him, the plan was lacking and unworthy. He reflected on how he had allowed Sarah to remain as the general of his army because of her outstanding performance on the battlefield. He had even refrained from taking her as one of his mistresses. Yet, in his view, his expectations had been confirmed. He believed that women were unreliable. Sarah had once been the general of a nation that Dragonia had destroyed. After their defeat, her people had been taken hostage, leaving her with no choice but to pledge loyalty to Bompard. Bompard then declared that he had no need for dragons at all. Sarah found the statement confusing. He clarified that instead of relying on dragons, they would begin training beasts. In his reasoning, maintaining dragons required too many resources. Feeding them, tending to their injuries, and keeping them from falling ill placed a heavy burden on the country. In contrast, beasts were easy to find and capture. They would not run away or die as easily, making them more practical in his eyes. He concluded on his own that the idea was brilliant and laughed loudly at his decision. After leaving the room, Sarah felt a growing sense of frustration. In her view, there was no way that wild beasts could be made to properly follow human commands. Even dragons, which were far more capable, required time before they could learn to trust and cooperate with people. The sheer arrogance of believing that beasts could be tamed so easily left a strong impression on Sarah. Bompard had insisted that dragons themselves were nothing more than beasts to begin with, and that this would serve as a chance to measure her abilities. She had no authority to question his decision. In Sarah's thoughts, the only comfort she could find in the situation was that, as a subordinate, she simply had to follow orders. That was the one thing that made it bearable. Her mind drifted to someone else. There had once been a person capable of guiding dragons as if they were extensions of his own body. Through a deep connection with them and an exceptional understanding of dragons, he could immediately recognize any illness or injury they suffered. If anything, that person might have even been capable of bringing down an entire castle alone. Yet that person was no longer there. She quietly wondered where he could be now, thinking that it would not have been unreasonable for him to at least appear before her. Meanwhile, in Levatin, Breed let out a yawn as he woke up. Someone called out to him from the doorway. Minnie stood there and mentioned that she would show him around the town. Breed looked at her for a moment, not immediately recognizing her. The change in her appearance made her seem different from how she usually was. Minnie reacted sharply to his confusion, making it clear that he should recognize her. Breed quickly realized who she was and noted that she looked quite different from her usual self. Minnie became slightly flustered, explaining that she dressed like that on her days off. Breed remarked that the look suited her well. Minnie admitted that she had never dressed that way before. In her thoughts, she wondered whether it might look strange on her. Breed then wondered what had brought this on. Minnie explained that he had been staying in the stable and working without rest. Because of that, she thought he should take a break for once. Breed seemed unsure about what she meant by taking a day off. Minnie pointed out that he had been pushing himself too hard. She urged him to get ready, making it clear that Fiana had instructed her to give him some time to rest from his work. Breed agreed and asked her to stop pulling him along. Soon after, he dashed outside, leaving the dragons in the stable behind while reminding them to take care of themselves. In the castle town of Levatin, Breed reflected on his past in Dragonia. Back then, he would work continuously from morning until evening without rest. Now, however, he was allowed to return to his lodgings, which made him feel that taking a break was not really necessary. Minnie urged him to stop overthinking and simply relax. She pointed ahead, showing him the castle town that had come into view. The place was filled with life. People were chatting happily, and everyone seemed busy with their own tasks. Minnie pointed out that most of those present were elders and children, yet the town still felt lively. Breed looked around from side to side, taking in everything with curiosity. Minnie called out to him, reminding him that he was a grown man and should stop staring around so openly. As his superior, she expected him not to embarrass her. Breed apologized, admitting that he had never really gone out like this before. At that moment, Minnie caught the scent of something delicious nearby. It came from a food stall. In Breed's mind, he felt uneasy about relaxing. He worried that he might cause trouble for his superior, and the unfamiliar surroundings felt distracting. Without warning, Minnie pushed a skewer of food into his mouth. The sudden heat caught him off guard, and he reacted immediately. Minnie simply urged him to eat it. Breed swallowed the food and quickly realized how good it tasted. The flavor impressed him. Minnie showed a satisfied expression, already aware of how good it was. She explained that it was meat from a thorny lizard, prepared as a steak. Breed noted how tender the meat was, practically melting in his mouth. Thorny lizards were known to be smaller versions of dragons. They were fierce and aggressive creatures, often attacking humans. In Breed's thoughts, this raised a question. If the people here could regularly eat such meat, it suggested that their livelihood was stable enough to support it. Hunting beasts and maintaining such traditions seemed deeply rooted in the town. Breed expressed his gratitude to Minnie. If the work he had taken on led to experiences like this, he felt that he would never want to leave it. Minnie laughed at his reaction. Breed continued eating another skewer, clearly enjoying it. Minnie then hinted at something even better she could show him, wearing a knowing and playful expression. They then made their way to the marketplace of Levatin. The area was crowded with people, filled with fresh fish and many other goods. Minnie pointed it out as their marketplace, the pride of Levatin. Breed observed that the place carried a level of liveliness far greater than the rest of the town. Minnie explained that the beasts hunted by the people were brought there, cut into smaller portions, and then distributed to vendors for sale. She also mentioned that they had something like a holiday atmosphere thanks to the grand python that Fiana had hunted. By now, its skin and bones were likely already being sold throughout the market. In Breed's thoughts, that was exactly what he would expect from Fiana. He could almost picture her looking pleased with herself. As he looked around more carefully, he noticed that aside from the townspeople and vendors, there were also merchants from other countries present. Minnie then pointed out an elderly craftsman, remarking on his exceptional skill. She gestured toward the gloves she was wearing and noted that they were a true work of art. Breed examined the gloves and quickly understood what she meant. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Inferior products would have worn out quickly, but judging by the quality of the leather and the precision of the stitching, it was clear that the maker had not taken any shortcuts. Work of that level was rarely seen. Minnie reacted with slight embarrassment, noting that she had only asked him to look and not to touch. The people nearby found the interaction amusing. Then Breed's attention shifted toward what looked like a stage. He recognized that it must be where the grand python was being handled. The creature was even larger than the one they had encountered before. Minnie observed that the people seemed to be struggling due to its size, suggesting that it might be beyond what the elderly men there could handle. Seeing that, Breed decided to step forward and help. Minnie tried to call him back, but he had already moved. The old men looked at him with curiosity. One of them seemed to recognize him and confirmed his name. Breed acknowledged it and offered his help. The man accepted, noting that they had been hoping for assistance from someone younger. Another mentioned that his back was already strained. They instructed Breed to pull the skin with all his strength. Breed took a breath and then acted. With a single effort he tore the skin apart. The men were left in surprise. One of them noted that even 5 people working together had not been able to do that. Another expressed admiration at his strength. The surrounding crowd responded with applause, praising how impressive Breed was. Minnie stepped forward and gave him a playful punch, acknowledging that he truly was remarkable. Breed remarked that it was fortunate he had not completely torn it apart. Minnie looked confused by what he meant. He then clarified that he had actually made a mistake by ripping the skin. With a single wrong move, the value of the product could have been lost. Minnie let out a small laugh at his concern, finding the idea unreasonable. To her, there was no way a person could rip apart the skin of a grand python. However, her expression suddenly changed. The realization struck her that Breed had come very close to doing exactly that. The thought made her question just how much strength he truly possessed. She assumed that his work with dragons must have trained him extensively, but even then, there should have been some limit. In her mind, she began to wonder what kind of dragons he had been dealing with all this time. The idea that his physical strength might rival that of dragons briefly crossed her thoughts, though it felt too unrealistic to fully accept. An elderly man then called out to Breed. Another expressed his gratitude for the help he had given. The first man admitted that the task had been far too difficult for them to handle on their own. Breed responded by acknowledging that he was simply glad to have been of assistance. One of the men then pointed out that Breed had gotten quite dirty during the work. He remarked that it was unfortunate for someone as good-looking as him to end up in such a state. Breed brushed it off, noting that the same could be said for everyone there. Another elderly man explained that such conditions were normal for them. They also mentioned that they avoided wasting water whenever possible, since the country lacked reliable water sources. One of them suggested that Breed could wash himself in the river. In Breed's thoughts, that idea did not seem practical. The country did not have any large rivers, and most of their water came from wells. To make matters worse, the majority of the townspeople were either elderly or children, making it difficult for them to draw water regularly. He quietly muttered to himself about the idea of a river. In his thoughts, having a river would allow the town to develop rapidly, and Fiana would surely be pleased by it. The idea began to take shape in his mind. He imagined a scene where he and Fiana stood by the river he had created. In that imagined moment, she would approach him and ask what was on his mind. Since he would have been the one who made the river possible, there would be no need for him to hold back. The two of them would be by the sandy shore, with the sound of water splashing around them. Fiana would be completely soaked and would look toward him, expecting him to make up for it. The image lingered until a sudden punch snapped him back to reality. Minnie stood before him, questioning what he had been doing. The blow caused him to drop slightly as he caught his breath, brushing it off as nothing. Minnie then mentioned that having a river would indeed be helpful. She also noted that she could really use a proper wash. Breed responded that he might actually be able to create a river. At the same time, a thought about swimsuits crossed his mind. The moment he said it, he froze, sharing a startled look with Minnie as he realized that he might have spoken out loud. The people nearby reacted immediately, their attention drawn to his words. Minnie looked at him closely, trying to confirm whether he was truly capable of creating a river. One of the elderly men expressed admiration, noting that it made sense why Fiana trusted him. A child eagerly asked if they would really be able to have a river. Inside, Breed began to panic. The surrounding voices grew more excited, with others expressing their belief that he would be able to make it happen. Some wondered how he would accomplish such a thing, especially since there were no rivers nearby. Others insisted that there was no reason to doubt him, since he had been personally brought there by Fiana, which meant he must already have a plan. In Breed's thoughts, there was no way he could admit that his words had simply slipped out while he was lost in his imagination. The child expressed gratitude toward him, as if it were already decided. At that moment, Breed realized that he might not have any choice but to follow through. All he could manage in response was an awkward laugh. By the river, Breed was lying down and relaxing. As he rested, someone ahead of him called out, asking what was wrong. Fiana then invited him to join them, and the atmosphere felt pleasant. Minnie agreed with the idea, noting that the one who contributed the most to creating the river should not hold back. Both of them were already in their swimsuits. Breed then ran toward them. Sometime later, Fiana reflected that she had enjoyed herself greatly. Breed wondered if Minnie had gone off to shop somewhere, but Fiana noted that it was now just the two of them. She reached out and touched his hand, causing his eyes to widen. She then moved closer and sat beside him, her face drawing near. His heart began to race. Suddenly, the moment was broken when he felt something bite his mouth. Breed jolted awake, sitting up from his bed. The dragons around him were also beginning to stir. Later that day, back at the stable, Minnie learned the truth and reacted with disbelief. She had originally thought that Breed had come up with a solid plan when he mentioned creating a river. Now, however, Breed was bowing deeply and apologizing, admitting that it had all been nothing more than a fantasy. Minnie let out a sigh, realizing that she had allowed herself to get carried away in the moment. Even so, she found herself wondering what exactly Breed had been thinking about. In truth, the thought had involved Fiana in a swimsuit, though Breed brushed it off as something unimportant. Minnie pointed out that the situation could become a real problem. The country was small, and rumors would spread quickly. By now, the story might have already reached the palace. Breed grew uneasy at the thought. Minnie added that it was even possible that Fiana herself had already heard about it. In Breed's mind, the consequences began to spiral. At this rate, he could end up being seen as a fraud and be completely rejected by everyone. He might lose the place he had worked so hard to secure. If that happened, his dragons could be slaughtered, and he himself might even face execution. His expression turned serious. He decided that the only way forward was to actually find a water source. Later, the two of them headed into the forest. Minnie questioned whether he was overreacting, suggesting that rumors alone were not such a serious issue. Breed, however, explained that even if people spoke badly about him, he could endure it. What he could not accept was anyone speaking poorly about Minnie or Lady Fiana. Minnie responded that such things would not bother her. Breed then told her that she did not need to come along with him. Minnie immediately rejected that idea, pointing out that the forest was dangerous. As his superior, she insisted on keeping an eye on him. She also wondered how he even planned to locate a water source. Breed revealed that he intended to seek help from someone. After reaching the top, Breed called out to someone. What appeared before them was Undine, a navy blue water dragon. Undine belonged to a species of dragons that preferred environments rich in water. These dragons were especially suited for aquatic surroundings, where they could move beneath the surface and approach their prey without being noticed. Due to their smaller bodies, they were not particularly fast runners, but they were still capable of keeping up with normal travel. Among female dragon masters, they were often praised for being both cute and easy to ride. As Undine approached Breed, Minnie quietly noted that it was a water dragon. Breed explained that water dragons had the ability to locate sources of water. Undine, in particular, could detect the scent of water from as far as 1 kilometer away. Minnie was surprised by the distance. The idea that a dragon could distinguish the scent of water within a forest filled with countless other smells seemed difficult to believe. Breed confirmed that Undine could do exactly that. The dragon would only react to clean water that suited its preference. By following it, they would be able to find a reliable water source. Minnie acknowledged the explanation but pointed out that the forest was vast. It stretched several kilometers in every direction, making the search uncertain. Breed agreed with that assessment. They would simply have to rely on their chances of finding water somewhere within it. In his thoughts, however, he did not want the search to take too long. If they kept everyone waiting, suspicion toward him might begin to grow. At that moment, he noticed something being thrown nearby. His attention shifted to a man below them. Minnie explained that the man was practicing spear throwing for hunting. Getting close to beasts was dangerous, so attacking from a distance was necessary. Breed understood and reflected on the method. Once the spear struck its target, the rope attached to it would be used to pull the beast back and prevent it from escaping. The idea lingered in his mind. Then, a new thought formed. He called out to the man and asked to borrow the spear. Later, with the rope firmly in his grasp, Breed prepared himself. Minnie watched and wondered what he intended to do. Breed had already decided on a method. There was a way to locate the scent of water without walking through the forest step by step. He spun the spear in his hand and then threw it deep into the forest. He threw the spear with great force, sending it far into the distance. It descended quickly and struck the ground, piercing the soil. Without delay, Breed pulled on the rope and drew the spear back toward him, catching it in his hand. He then brought the spear close to Undine and let the dragon sniff it, checking whether it had picked up any trace of water. Undine shook its head in response. Breed quietly noted that the attempt had failed. He prepared to try again, adjusting his direction before throwing the spear once more. Minnie began to understand what he was doing. By using the spear to reach deep into the ground, he could bring back traces of moisture hidden beneath the surface. This allowed Undine to detect the scent of water without them needing to walk through every part of the forest. In this way, the range of their search could be expanded. Breed confirmed the idea. With this method, they would be able to locate a water source much more quickly. However, he also acknowledged that it was only possible because of Undine's sharp sense of smell. In Minnie's thoughts, though, she believed that the true factor behind the method's success was Breed's overwhelming physical strength. Undine sniffed the spear again after another throw. This time, its reaction changed. Its eyes sharpened, and a low growl escaped from it. Breed recognized the shift immediately and realized that they had found something. They began moving deeper into the forest. As they advanced, Breed noted that they were getting closer to the water source, and Undine's reactions were becoming stronger. Minnie observed that there were still no signs of beasts in the area. While that made things safer for them, it also felt somewhat unusual. Breed explained that it was unlikely they would encounter any. Minnie questioned why that was the case. Breed revealed that he had been having Undine leave traces of its scent along their path. He had even kept some with him as a precaution. The presence of a strong dragon's scent would keep other creatures away. Minnie reacted with immediate disgust at the idea. The explanation alone was enough to unsettle her. Breed continued, explaining that such traces would not attract flies right away, allowing them to serve as markers for navigation. They could also help someone find their way back if they became lost. Minnie found it surprising that something like that could be used in such a practical way. Breed admitted that he had learned these methods through necessity. During his time in Dragonia, although he had been proud to serve as a dragon master in the military, there had been many occasions where he was left behind or lost his way in the forest. Through those experiences, he had picked up various survival skills. Minnie reflected that it must have been difficult for him. At that moment, Undine let out a distinct sound. Breed reacted with surprise as he realized that they had truly found a water source. Undine also appeared energized by the discovery. Minnie, however, remained confused by what she was seeing. Minnie looked at the water and felt something was off. The amount seemed too small. At that rate, there was no way they could draw enough water all the way back to the town. It felt like a wasted effort. She accepted that there was nothing they could do about it and thought that, since they had gone through the trouble of finding it, they might as well take a dip before heading back. Breed, however, disagreed. In his thoughts, judging by Undine's reaction, the amount of water should not have been this limited. Minnie then noticed something unusual and pointed it out. Water appeared to be flowing out from a large rock. Breed realized that this must have been what created the small pool below. Minnie considered whether moving the rock might reveal more water. Breed agreed that it was worth trying. He placed his hands against it and pushed. Minnie immediately reacted, noticing that the rock had shifted slightly. Breed found that hard to believe, but Minnie insisted she had seen it move. There was even a visible mark showing where it had shifted. In Breed's mind, the situation became clear. Half of the rock was embedded into the cliff, making it extremely difficult to move. At best, Undine might be able to squeeze through a small gap. Meanwhile, Undine had already begun eating nearby, losing awareness of its surroundings as it focused on its food. Breed leaned down and dipped his face into the water, trying to cool his head. Thinking too much had given him a headache. As he examined the water, he noticed how clear it was. Water found deep within mountains was usually murky, but this one was exceptionally pure, likely because Undine had located it. Then something caught his attention. Among the rocks and scattered leaves beneath the water, there appeared to be thin white shapes that looked like branches. He found himself wondering what they were. For a moment, it seemed as if something had moved. Since the pool was formed from spring water, there should not have been any fish inside. Suddenly, the water splashed violently. A large bubble surfaced, and the ground trembled slightly. Minnie immediately sensed the danger, her eyes widening. Behind Breed, a set of massive teeth emerged from the water. She tried to warn him. A huge water creature rose from below, its presence overwhelming. Breed turned and found himself dangerously close to its open jaws. A loud splash followed. Before he could react, he was dragged beneath the water. The sharp teeth loomed just behind Breed. Before being pulled completely beneath the surface, he cast one last glance toward Minnie. Under the water, he struggled against the crushing force of the monster's jaws. In his mind, its strength was overwhelming. A single mistake would be enough for his body to be torn apart. When he had seen it earlier, there had been no doubt about its identity. It was a mill crocodile. Mill crocodiles were creatures often found in rivers or ponds, known for the pronounced muscles along their faces. Their bites carried immense force, strong enough to crush shells and bones with ease. Anything caught within their jaws would be ground down completely, much like being crushed by a millstone. That was how they came to be called mill crocodiles. The realization struck him. The white fragments drifting in the water were not branches at all, but the remains of crushed bones. The creature had likely been hiding beneath the surface, waiting to ambush animals that came to drink. After devouring them, it left the broken remains behind. Even so, this particular one was far larger than usual. It was at least twice the size of a normal mill crocodile, making it even bigger than Undine. The water churned with bubbles around him. Breed thought of Minnie. She was probably trying to command Undine to come after him. But Undine rarely listened to anyone other than Breed himself. On top of that, the dragon had been in the middle of eating its favorite food. There was little chance it would respond to Minnie's calls. That meant no help would come. Breed accepted that he would have to act on his own. He doubted he could endure long enough to wait for rescue. His breath was already running out. At this rate, he would not last more than a minute. The situation reminded him of something from his past. There had been a time when a dragon had clamped down hard on his gloves. He had not immediately shaken it off, thinking it was harmless at first. No matter what he tried, he could not break free, and he had begun to lose hope. Then by chance he had sneezed. That unexpected action had caused the dragon to loosen its grip, even if only for a moment. From that past experience, Breed had learned something important. No matter what kind of living creature he faced, if it lost focus for even a moment while exerting force, there would always be a chance to resist and break free. With that in mind, he prepared himself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out what he had kept earlier. It was the dragon's feces. Without hesitation, he threw it toward the mill crocodile. The creature swallowed it. Almost immediately, its reaction changed. Its eyes widened, and its movements became unsettled. Mill crocodiles did not have good eyesight, but their sense of smell was extremely sharp. Throwing something with such a strong odor into its mouth would overwhelm its senses. Taking advantage of that brief distraction, Breed moved. He pushed himself away from its jaws and managed to break free. For a moment, it seemed like he had escaped. But the realization came quickly. He had no air left. He was still too far from the surface. With no other choice, he forced himself to keep moving through the water. His hand reached out and grabbed onto something, hoping to use it to propel himself upward. He seized a large rock and shifted it. As it moved, bubbles poured out from it. The sight gave him an idea. The rocks in the water were filled with trapped air, releasing bubbles when disturbed. Below him, the mill crocodile was already recovering. When he looked down, he saw that the rock had ended up in the creature's mouth. He quickly pushed it further in, forcing it to bite down on the rock instead. Using that moment, he stepped onto the rock and pushed off, using the resistance to launch himself upward. The water churned as he ascended. At last, he broke through the surface, gasping for air. Minnie called out to him as he swam toward the shore. He reached land, and Minnie immediately checked on him to see if he was all right. Minnie was deeply shaken, having been worried the entire time. Breed reassured her that he was fine. From what she had briefly seen, she recognized the creature as a mill crocodile, though its size had been far beyond normal. The fact that he had made it out alive left a strong impression on her. She also mentioned that Undine had not moved at all, which had only added to her panic. Breed admitted that he had expected as much. Nearby, Undine was still occupied, calmly chewing on grass. Only after a moment did the dragon notice Breed's presence, giving him a look that seemed to question what had just happened. Breed could not help but complain internally that it had taken Undine far too long to notice him. Minnie reached out her hand to help him. Breed admitted that his body would not respond properly and asked her to pull him up. He expressed his gratitude as she helped him to his feet. In his mind, it felt as though he had finally made it out of danger. But in the next instant, the massive jaws of the mill crocodile lunged toward them. There was no time to react. The creature had already crushed the rock in its mouth and was now closing in again. Breed tensed as its teeth came dangerously close to him. Then suddenly its movement stopped. The mill crocodile froze in place. Instead of attacking, it hesitated, then slowly stepped back. Undine stood nearby, staring at it with a steady and intimidating gaze. The mill crocodile faced the dragon and came to a complete stop. Under that unwavering presence, it began to retreat, backing away little by little. Undine remained still, yet the pressure it gave off was unmistakable. As a dragon, it carried the authority of a lineage that once sought to dominate the entire continent. That presence was deeply rooted, an instinctive force passed down through generations. No matter how large or powerful another creature might be, it could not escape the fear that had been etched into its being since ancient times. Breed observed that Undine was truly remarkable. Minnie agreed, noting how the dragon could overwhelm a much larger beast through sheer presence alone. Breed explained that water dragons had once hunted mill crocodiles regularly, subduing them with ease. The fear that had been planted in these creatures since ancient times had likely never faded. He also pointed out that the mill crocodile had already accepted Undine as its superior. At that moment, Undine was seen resting calmly on top of the mill crocodile, as if nothing had happened. Seeing this, Breed came up with an idea. He considered making use of the mill crocodile's strength. Not long after, they tied a rope around the large rock. Breed began directing the effort, adjusting the approach and indicating how it should be pushed. He continued giving instructions, refining the movement so that the force would be applied correctly. Minnie watched and tried to understand what he was doing. It became clear that Breed was using the mill crocodile to assist them. Through Undine, the instructions were being passed along, allowing the creature to follow the intended movements. In her thoughts, it seemed like yet another unusual idea from him, but one that somehow worked. Breed believed it was a solid plan. Minnie decided to help as well. She grabbed onto the rope, and together they began pulling. As they worked, the rock started to shift. Breed noted that it was moving and urged for one final push. With Breed, Undine, and Minnie all working together, the rock finally gave way. At once, water burst out from behind it. Minnie was amazed by the amount of water flowing out. Breed noted that the plan had worked. With this much water, it seemed possible to create a river. The next step would have been to guide the flow by having the dragons dig a channel. Before he could continue, Minnie noticed something concerning. The water was not just flowing, it was pouring out in overwhelming amounts. Both of them grew uncertain as the flow intensified. Cracks began forming in the surrounding rocks. Then, everything gave way. With a sudden burst, the water exploded outward, sweeping them along. Breed struggled to keep his head above the surface as the current carried him. Even in the chaos, he called out to Undine in acknowledgement. The pond collapsed completely in an instant. The situation quickly turned dangerous. If all that water rushed toward the town, it could lead to severe flooding and cause serious damage. Suddenly, Fiana arrived riding her flying dragon, having finally located Breed. Breed immediately acknowledged her presence. Fiana questioned whether the sudden surge of water had been caused by them. Breed and Minnie both froze, a heavy realization settling in. They understood what this meant for them. Without hesitation, they dropped to their knees. Breed lowered his head and admitted that he had spoken carelessly, raising expectations he could not fulfill. In the end, his actions had led to the town being flooded. His thoughts spiraled further as he concluded that what he had done was unforgivable. He resolved that he would take responsibility for it, even if it meant giving up his life. Beside him, Minnie also spoke up, admitting fault on her part. She believed that if she had not encouraged things, the situation might not have escalated this far. Despite everything, she insisted that neither of them had intended for this outcome. She sought mercy for Breed, hoping that his life could be spared. Fiana, however, responded in an unexpected way. She began to laugh. It became clear that there was a misunderstanding. Without explaining further, she told them to follow her. They did as instructed. As they moved forward, Fiana stated that they would understand once they saw the result for themselves. Then, something ahead caught Breed's attention. His eyes widened in disbelief. The townspeople were unharmed. Not only that, they were cheering. A river now flowed through the area. Rather than destruction, the water had brought new life. The people were actively working around it, making use of the river. Breed struggled to understand what had happened. The town remained intact, and instead of being flooded, it had gained a river. Based on his understanding, the terrain should have caused the water to spread and overwhelm the area. Minnie urged him to look more closely. Following her direction, Breed saw the elderly men working with scoops, shaping and guiding the flow of water. At that moment, the realization began to settle in. One of the elderly men confirmed it. After Breed and Minnie had left, the people of the town had worked together to guide the water and form the river. Another voice added that it was a relief they had managed to finish everything in time. Breed and Minnie stood there in complete shock. In Breed's thoughts, the situation felt unreal. All of these people had worked together on a plan that had very little chance of succeeding. He had been aware that word might spread through the town, but he had never imagined that they would go this far without any solid proof that it would work. Fiana then revealed that she had been the one who gave the order. Breed was taken aback by that. Minnie also reacted with surprise, wondering how Fiana could have made such a decision without considering the possibility that Breed might fail. Breed agreed with that concern, acknowledging that if things had gone wrong, all of their effort would have been wasted. Fiana, however, remained calm and dismissed that concern. To her, there had been no doubt. She explained that Breed was someone she had personally recognized and approved of. That alone had been enough for her to place her trust in him. Breed hesitated, admitting that while he was grateful for her confidence, he felt that she might be overestimating him. Fiana responded that she had her reasons. Breed found himself confused by that. Fiana then made it clear that she believed Breed would achieve far greater things than this. In her view, he should already be aware of that himself. Breed tried to deny it, awkwardly insisting that he was nothing more than a simple dragon master. Fiana only smiled, expressing that she expected even greater accomplishments from him in the future. With no real way to refuse, Breed accepted it. Inside, however, he felt a sense of unease, almost as if he was being pushed forward in a way he could not fully understand. The thought crossed his mind that he might simply be someone who allowed himself to be led along without resistance. Minnie noticed his expression and wondered what was troubling him. Breed admitted that he did not fully understand himself either. Fiana then urged him forward, treating the moment as the return of someone who had achieved something great. In the northern forest of Dragonia, the soldiers struggled to capture a beast. One of them noted that the creature would not move an inch, while another urged it to obey them. The captain of the Dragon Knight's order, Sarah, stood nearby and quietly reflected that this must be the inborn viciousness of beasts. A soldier in front of her admitted he had expected this outcome, believing that taming beasts instead of dragons was simply impossible. Another pointed out how dragons only became capable of listening to humans after 100 years, reinforcing the difficulty of the task. Sarah concluded that making beasts obey them seemed impossible. With the combined effort of several soldiers, they barely managed to restrain the creature, yet Sarah doubted that anyone could successfully ride it. Then a voice broke through, giving precise and confident instructions as movements were directed step by step. A man suddenly launched himself upward and landed onto the beast. A faint smirk crossed his face as he steadied himself. The beast reacted with a heavy thud, startled by the impact. The man called out for the others to prepare to cushion his fall. Without hesitation, he struck the beast with force. Afterward, he turned to Sarah and sought her opinion. She acknowledged that the display had been impressive and magnificent. In her thoughts, she recalled hearing that this man had entered the Dragon Knight's order because his chances of inheriting the throne were low. Even so, he undeniably came from royal blood. He was Marco don Dragonia, the fourth prince of Dragonia. Sarah felt no fondness toward him. Upon landing, Marco reached out and lifted Sarah's chin with a casual gesture. He boasted about his confidence, not only in taming beasts but also in handling women, inviting her to test it. Sarah responded by calling his remark vulgar and struck him before walking away. Marco told her not to appear so frightening, insisting that he had only been joking. In her thoughts, she recognized that she truly disliked him. Back in her hometown, people like him did not exist. She could not help but think how things might have been different if they had not fallen to people like these thieves of Dragonia. Marco then called out to the others and declared that since they were already there, they might as well raid the nearby village. He allowed that anyone who obtained alcohol or women could keep them. The soldiers responded with cheers, saying that such behavior was expected of Prince Marco. One soldier hesitated and asked what would happen if the territory's owners retaliated, since it belonged to another country. Marco dismissed the concern, mocking the idea that anyone would be foolish enough to stand against Dragonia. Sarah's eyes widened at what she had just heard. Marco followed with a cold addition, making it clear that anyone foolish enough to resist would simply be killed. Meanwhile, in Levatin, Breed stood in surprise at the sight before him. Lavish food had been prepared, far beyond what he expected. Minnie explained that the men present were farmers who wished to show their gratitude to him. The farmers confirmed this, expressing how they had struggled for a long time due to their limited water supply. They reached out to shake Breed's hand, explaining that the river he had drawn for them would make their fieldwork much easier. One of them admitted that he would no longer need to sell his family members just to survive. To them, Breed seemed like a messenger sent by the gods. Breed faltered at the praise and denied such claims. He insisted that he had only done what felt natural, though he also believed they more than deserved their current fortune. In his thoughts, he reflected on how the fantasies he had casually spoken about had somehow worked in his favor. Being praised for something that came so lightly left him with mixed feelings. One of the farmers then mentioned their plan to hold a grand party in his honor, meant to properly express their gratitude. He expected Breed to attend. Breed tried to refuse, explaining that he still had work to do. Minnie encouraged him to go, assuring him that she would take care of the dragons in his place. The farmers pleaded for his agreement, and soon after, they began to leave, calling back that they would be waiting for him. Once they were gone, Breed quietly asked Minnie for help, admitting that he was uneasy about going alone. Minnie responded with a confident grin, telling him that he would be fine and should simply do his best. She added that if he made a good impression, her reputation would improve even further. Breed reacted with sudden realization. Accepting this, he pointed toward one of the dragons and decided to take her with him. Later, the farmer's place was filled with lively amusement. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement as a dragon performed tricks like a circus act. The dragon was Aphrodite, the red dragon. Following Breed's direction, she moved on to the next act, climbing onto a large ball. The moment she began to roll, the ball spun beneath her, continuing the performance. The crowd burst into cheers, praising Sir Breed's taming skills as something remarkable. To them, it was exactly what they would expect from the man Lady Fiana had brought along. The dragon performing before them was Aphrodite, a female red dragon said to have inherited the blood of Barbarossa. She moved with the agility of a cat, showing a level of dexterity that allowed her to perform nearly anything with ease. Breed reflected that Aphrodite's performance had achieved its purpose. Bringing her along had been the right decision. The farmers continued to praise him for the splendid display. As a sign of their gratitude, an old man urged him not to hold back and to drink as much as he wished. Accepting the offer, Breed drank deeply. Someone nearby found it amusing how well he could handle his drink. Behind him, Aphrodite quietly observed the scene. The people around them commented on how pleasant Breed was, admiring his demeanor. In his thoughts, Breed reasoned that he was simply maintaining proper etiquette while drinking, though he could feel himself starting to grow a little tipsy. A young voice expressed concern that he was being made to drink too much. Another offered him water, while someone else reached out and touched his arm, noting its firmness. A third remarked on how well built he was. One of the girls scolded the others for their behavior, calling it improper, but another dismissed the concern, suggesting there was no harm in it. They believed Breed must be enjoying the attention from the women. Breed let out a light, unsteady laugh. Another girl mentioned that there were drinks other than alcohol available, while someone continued to admire his physique. A faint blush appeared on his face. In his thoughts, he admitted that he was still a man, and being admired by the women was something he naturally enjoyed. It felt like a moment of rare popularity. Suddenly, Aphrodite let out a low growl, startling the girls and causing them to step back. One of them wondered if it was just her, or if the dragon was clearly upset. Breed apologized, explaining that Aphrodite tended to become a little jealous. The dragon responded by pouting. Breed recalled that whenever she behaved like this, she stopped listening to him. He tried to calm her, promising that once they returned home he would let her enjoy a hearty meal. He urged her to stop sulking and attempted to offer her something, but Aphrodite swatted it away. Breed realized he was in trouble, his thoughts clouded by the alcohol he had consumed. Without warning, Aphrodite grabbed him by his clothes. The sensation felt strangely familiar, like something he had experienced before. In the next moment she took off at a sudden dash. Breed found himself being carried along behind her, quickly calling out an apology to the people and assuring them he would return shortly. Aphrodite ran swiftly, disappearing from the lively scene. The women watched in awe, remarking on how Breed was not only popular among people but also favored by dragons. Aphrodite continued running without slowing down. Breed shouted as he was jolted around, trying to calm her. The violent motion grew worse with the alcohol still affecting him. His thoughts cut off as nausea rose, and he began to vomit. Turning his head to the side, he caught sight of the surroundings and recognized the place. He signaled for her to head in a certain direction. Aphrodite shifted into a zigzag path. The movement made his stomach churn again, but he endured it, knowing they were close. Soon they came to a stop. Aphrodite's eyes sparkled at what lay ahead. A wide field of flowers spread out before her. Breed gently patted her. He stepped forward, plucked several flowers, and carefully wove them into a crown. He called to Aphrodite and placed it on her, noting how well it suited her and how pretty she looked. The dragon responded with a soft hum. He knew this reaction well. She loved flowers, and no matter how bad her mood became, placing a flower crown on her head would always make her stop sulking. He recalled finding this place earlier while searching for a water source. At the time, he had not thought much of remembering it, yet it now proved useful since it was exactly the kind of place Aphrodite liked. Aphrodite then bit the flower crown and placed it on his head instead. Breed let out a small chuckle, relieved that her mood had improved. He noted to himself that she had finally cheered up and thought it was time for them to head back. Without warning, Aphrodite's expression sharpened. She became alert and let out a low growl. Grabbing his sleeve, she pulled him behind a nearby boulder. Breed wondered what had caused her reaction and whether she was still upset. Then the sound of footsteps reached them. There were people nearby. Carefully, Breed peeked from behind the rock. His eyes widened at what he saw. A familiar flag came into view, and men were riding menacing beasts beneath it. He recognized them as Dragonia's dragon knights. Confusion crossed his mind as he tried to understand why they were there. A sense of urgency followed. They needed to leave immediately. He urged Aphrodite to move, telling her to stay calm as they prepared to slip away. But before they could act, a sharp crack echoed behind them. Breed turned back just as the boulder began to crumble, breaking apart until their cover was gone. They were exposed. The soldiers quickly recognized him. The dragon master who had been dismissed stood before them. One of them questioned his presence there. Another dismounted from his beast, stepping forward with interest, having not expected to encounter him in such a place. The man recognized Breed and recalled his name. Aphrodite let out another low growl. Breed lifted his gaze to see who the man was. The figure before him wore a smirk, identifying him as the one known for carrying the scent of dragons. Breed hesitated, trying to recall the man's identity. Breed asked who the man in front of him was. Marco's posture slackened at the question. The surrounding soldiers reacted immediately, raising their voices in disbelief, unable to accept that Breed would fail to recognize him. Breed maintained that he did not know what they expected him to say. His days had been entirely occupied with taking care of his dragons, leaving little room for anything else. The soldiers then introduced the man properly as Marco, the fourth prince of Dragonia. He was known as a strong candidate to become the next captain of the Dragon Knights Order. Breed responded with a simple acknowledgement. One of the soldiers proudly emphasized that Marco's skills were exceptional despite his royal status. At the same time, his arrogance stood just as prominently. Marco was someone who had risen through the ranks at an unusually fast pace. Breed still appeared uncertain and slightly confused. He asked what this man, whom he misnamed, was doing there. The soldiers reacted sharply, correcting him with irritation and questioning whether he was doing it on purpose. Another threatened him, their patience wearing thin. Marco then explained their situation, making it clear that they were prepared for a prolonged effort. They could use the lizard-like beasts as they wished, which was why he had been putting them through intense training. Breed considered this, realizing that they were using these creatures as substitutes for dragons. Normally, such a thing would be impossible, as beasts were too wild to be tamed. He could not understand how Marco had managed it. Marco then drew out his whip and directed his attention toward Breed, questioning whether he intended to simply stand there and watch. Instinctively, Breed raised his arms to shield himself. However, Marco was not targeting him. Breed hesitated, trying to understand where the attack was aimed. Marco's expression shifted into a grin. A spear came flying toward them, but before it could reach its target, Aphrodite moved swiftly and grabbed Breed, pulling him out of harm's way. The attack missed them completely. Marco observed that Breed was doing quite well at avoiding his strikes. In Breed's thoughts, he noted how Marco skillfully spun his spear before throwing it, sending it in a path like a boomerang. Marco remarked on how much the dragon seemed to care for its master, pointing out how deeply attached it was to Breed, and laughed. Breed reacted with frustration, questioning Marco's actions and wondering what he had been thinking. He could not understand why such a reckless move had been made and questioned Marco's state of mind. Marco then brushed his bangs aside, revealing a scar. He drew attention to it, implying that Breed should remember it. Back when Breed had escaped with his dragons, Marco had done everything he could to stop him, and the scar remained as a mark of that encounter, something he considered a battle wound. Nearby, one of the soldiers quietly murmured a different version of events, recalling that the scar had actually come from Marco attempting to rush ahead first, only to trip and fall onto a rock. Another soldier quickly tried to silence the remark, but Marco sharply ordered them to be quiet. He turned his attention back to Breed, making his intent clear. He declared that he would kill him, reasoning that taking down the head of a rebellious faction would secure his rise through the ranks. Breed questioned what he meant. Marco explained that although he did not know what methods Breed had used, he was suspected of stealing 100 dragons. Because of that, a bounty had been placed on Breed's head, alive or dead. At that moment, Aphrodite launched an attack from behind Marco. Marco reacted without concern, noting that Breed's dragon seemed eager to fight. He contrasted her boldness with what he viewed as Breed's weakness. With a casual motion, he countered and sent Aphrodite crashing back toward Breed. He then signaled for her to continue, treating the encounter as if it were nothing more than a performance. Breed struggled to understand what he was witnessing. Marco's control over the beasts did not make sense. Unlike dragons, beasts never grew accustomed to humans. They would normally attack on sight. Training them was known to be extremely difficult, almost impossible. Yet Marco handled them with ease. Breed's gaze shifted toward the beasts. He noticed the marks on their bodies, the visible injuries they carried. From that, he reached a realization. Marco let out a laugh and revealed his method. It was simple in his view. He controlled the beasts through fear. That, to him, was the most effective way. Breed clenched his teeth at the sight. Marco continued, recalling how he had always been taught to treat dragons with care while growing up. However, beasts were different in his eyes, and he believed they could be used however he pleased. To demonstrate, he pressed against one of the beast's wounds. His manner made it clear that this was his way of handling them. The injured beast staggered forward under the pain. Breed could see the creature struggling, its eyes filled with distress. Anger rose within him. He admitted to himself that trying to run had been a mistake. Facing the beasts, he acknowledged that they had every right to be angered by Marco's treatment. As a dragon master, he could not ignore what he was seeing. Breed lived alongside dragons. Even if these creatures were called beasts, they were still living beings. As someone who had been entrusted with their lives, he could not ignore the cruelty being inflicted on them. Marco reacted with disbelief, questioning Breed's state of mind. He then ordered the beasts to attack all at once. Aphrodite stepped forward, positioning herself in front of Breed as she faced the beasts. The creatures tensed under her gaze. One by one, they halted completely. None of them moved. Marco's voice rose in frustration as he demanded to know what they were doing. He urged them to move, but the beasts only trembled before the dragon. Anger crossed his face as he cursed them, calling them useless. He dismissed the situation and shifted his focus. Deciding to act himself, he prepared another attack, planning to send his weapon spinning in a vertical motion. In his mind, Breed would not be able to evade it, even if he tried to jump. The soldiers around him voiced their admiration, praising his skill. Marco declared that the moment Breed made any movement, he would pierce straight through him. The attack came. The spear struck Breed. For a brief moment, Marco showed satisfaction, but it quickly faded. His eyes widened in shock. Breed had stopped the spear with his own muscles, holding it in place. Breed acknowledged that Marco had been right. He had not been fast enough to dodge the attack. Still, he noted to himself that evading it had not required any skill at all. He then gripped the spear firmly and pulled it free. The moment shifted. Now it was his turn. Holding the weapon in his hand, he prepared to return the strike. Marco reacted with anger, offended by the way Breed addressed him without honor. He looked down on him, calling him nothing more than an insolent and lowly dragon master. The soldiers suddenly raised their voices, warning that Breed was advancing. Aphrodite suddenly charged forward. She leapt into the air, closing in on Marco's group in a swift motion. Marco was taken aback, unable to believe what he was seeing. The level of control Breed had over his dragon did not make sense to him. Even so, he reminded himself that Breed was still an amateur on the battlefield. Distance should have been enough to keep him safe. There was no way a thrown spear could reach him from that far. Yet to his shock it did. Marco struggled to understand how it had happened. It should have been impossible. Still, Breed had somehow closed the gap, using only the smallest movement of his fingertips to guide the strike. A heavy impact followed. Breed staggered forward toward Marco, who had been knocked down. Marco quickly regained his footing but chose to retreat, pulling back as he resolved to deal with Breed another time. With the tension easing, Breed's serious expression faded. He let out a breath and laughed lightly, realizing how frightening the situation had been. He had been genuinely worried, yet somehow managed to pull through. He thought it might have been because of the way Aphrodite had fixed her gaze on their enemies. His thoughts soon shifted. He questioned why Dragonia soldiers had come all the way to that place. The possibility that they intended to attack Levatin crossed his mind. Regardless, he knew he had to report what had happened to Fiana. He turned to Aphrodite, intending to head back. However, she was now surrounded by the beasts, drawing their attention. He recalled how popular she tended to be. Despite that, she suddenly leapt back toward him. He considered that the reason the lizard beasts had stopped earlier was not only due to her presence. He gently patted her head, and she responded by licking his face. The surrounding beasts watched the interaction before slowly turning away. Breed noted to himself that if Aphrodite continued behaving like that, she might end up missing her chance to find a partner, much like him. With that thought, they made their way back to town, Breed letting out a quiet sigh at her behavior. Inside the office at Levatin's castle, Fiana listened as the report was given. She had not expected that Dragonia soldiers would be stationed so close to their country, and the situation left her questioning their intentions. Breed grew uneasy and averted his gaze. Fiana noted that, for now, it might not become a serious problem. However, Breed suddenly shifted the topic and asked if she was the type who struggled with keeping her room organized. The state of the room made the answer clear, as things were scattered everywhere. Fiana looked away, acknowledging that she had shown him an unflattering sight. She admitted that she had never been good at keeping her room clean. Breed dismissed it, saying it was nothing to worry about. Fiana insisted that the room was usually kept tidy and quietly swore to it. Breed accepted her explanation. Fiana then added that the situation was worse because the person responsible for maintaining the room was currently absent, which made things inconvenient for her. Breed asked who she was referring to. Fiana explained that it was her maid, the one who handled her needs. Breed found himself surprised that she had a maid at all. Fiana assured him that the maid should be returning at any moment. At that instant, a sudden presence appeared behind him. Breed stiffened at the sensation. A soft voice marked the arrival, carrying a tone that felt both calm and unsettling. The maid stepped forward with a light giggle. Breed turned, startled, trying to understand what had just happened. The maid approached him without hesitation and greeted him. With a composed but slightly intimidating manner, she introduced herself as Vina, the exclusive maid serving Lady Fiana. She lightly moved her sleeves as she stood before him. Breed remained caught off guard, unable to grasp when she had even entered the room. He wondered how she already knew his name. Vina shifted slightly as she began listing what she knew. She recognized him as Breed Stallion, known as Dragonia's outcast and a talented dragon master. She was aware that he had brought 100 dragons with him and had since been employed in Levatin. From what she had observed, he had built a notable reputation after arriving. She was familiar with how he had helped deal with dangerous beasts, how he had created a river for the land, and even how he had gained popularity among the women in the village. Fiana remarked that Breed's surprise was understandable. Vina was clearly not an ordinary maid. She affirmed this herself, describing her role as that of a ninja maid, something quite rare. Breed showed curiosity, prompting her to elaborate. She explained that her work involved espionage, infiltration, and even influencing political matters. She was a maid who had pledged her loyalty to her master, and at the same time, a descendant of ninjas who operated in secrecy, handling tasks that others would avoid. She revealed that Vina was only an alias and asked for understanding regarding that. She offered a simpler name, suggesting that they could call her Vi instead. Moving closer to Breed, she spoke in a quiet yet intense manner, giving off an unsettling presence. Breed responded awkwardly, acknowledging the situation. Fiana then shared how she had once found Vina collapsed on a beach. With no place left to go after leaving her homeland, Vina had been taken in and allowed to work there. She had since dyed her naturally beautiful black hair and discarded the clothing of her homeland. Fiana asked Breed not to pry further into Vina's past. Breed accepted this and apologized. Vina lightly noted that understanding was enough. While she discouraged others from probing into her matters, she herself had already gathered valuable information. After Dragonia lost its dragons, it had increased the number of soldiers assigned to patrols, using this show of force to intimidate neighboring countries. At the same time, they had begun capturing beasts and using them as substitutes for dragons. She believed that the ones Breed had faced earlier were among those captured creatures. Breed swallowed uneasily. Vina continued, explaining that pain was being used to force the beasts into obedience. Near their station, there was even a pile of dead beasts. Fiana took in the information and began to understand the situation. She questioned what Dragonia intended to achieve by capturing beasts in such a manner, thinking it would have been faster to simply purchase them instead. Vina concluded that Dragonia was likely trying to reduce expenses as much as possible. The country was currently suffering from financial strain on multiple fronts. Hearing this, Breed was reminded of how executions had been carried out one after another within Dragonia. Breed understood that if he had remained in Dragonia, he would have likely faced the same fate as the others. The country had been recruiting more and more inexperienced individuals, paying them very little. Fiana found this hard to believe, noting that while it might reduce costs, it would also risk pushing the entire nation into decline. Vina explained that the country was already in a chaotic state. They were using everything available to them without restraint, focusing on increasing their numbers by recruiting newcomers. That approach had become their policy. Fiana came to a realization, recognizing how dangerous such a direction could be. Cutting costs while rapidly expanding their forces was not a stable path. Vina agreed, pointing out that such actions were typical of a nation driven into a corner. There was a strong possibility that they were preparing for war. Conducting military exercises near neighboring countries would allow them to observe reactions, and if an opportunity appeared, they might proceed with an invasion. The capturing and training of beasts seemed to be part of these early preparations. Fiana added that once their training was complete, they might launch an attack somewhere. That meant doing nothing was not an option. She decided that she would infiltrate their station and carry out sabotage without revealing that it had been their doing. She then looked to Vina, seeking confirmation that she could rely on her. Vina accepted without hesitation. To Breed's surprise, the previously messy room was suddenly spotless, as if it had been cleaned in an instant. Vina smiled and then mentioned that she had one favor she wished to ask of Princess Fiana. At the station of Dragonia's army near the borders, the knights remained occupied with their duties. Tents had been set up across the area, and soldiers moved about as they carried out various tasks. The camp had been established near a mountain. High above, on the mountain, two figures stood watching. Vina observed the scene through a pair of binoculars, noting the large number of soldiers present. There were over 100 of them, and it appeared they were in the process of constructing a fortress among the rows of tents. Their objective was clear, to destroy that fortress. Breed turned to Vina, expressing his concern. It felt late to ask, but he questioned why she had brought him along. Infiltration and sabotage seemed like tasks far beyond his abilities. To him, it sounded difficult, and he doubted that someone as inexperienced as himself would be of any help. He feared that he might only become an obstacle. Vina responded with a faint smile, pointing out that someone like her, presenting herself as a maid, would stand out too much if she approached a group of rough soldiers. Breed admitted that she had a point, but he also reminded her that the soldiers already knew what he looked like. That, in his mind, would be a problem. Vina assured him that it would not be an issue and told him to leave it to her. She then took out a set of makeup tools. With calm confidence, she explained that even with Breed's distinct features, she could alter his appearance into something far more plain and unnoticeable. Before he could fully process it, his face had already been transformed. Breed reacted with astonishment. The change was remarkable. These must have been the disguise techniques of a ninja. Even the structure of his face appeared different. Vina let out a small laugh and reminded him that he had once lived in Dragonia. Because of that, he should already be familiar with the routines and behavior of the soldiers there. Breed wondered if he would still be expected to carry out any sabotage himself. Vina clarified that he would not be responsible for that. She would handle the sabotage. Breed realized that his role was simply to accompany her. Vina's expression softened into a quiet smile, confirming that his understanding was correct. Vina instructed Breed to remove his clothes and turn away. Without hesitation, she leapt onto his back. The sudden action caught him off guard. She then began fastening pieces of armor onto them both. Before long, they were concealed together within a single suit of a knight's armor. Vina let out a light laugh, noting that with this method, even Breed's physique could be altered. It served two purposes at once. Breed wondered where she had even obtained such armor. Normally, armor like that belonged to vice captains in Dragonia. He also noticed the faint bloodstains covering parts of it, which only added to his unease. Vina offered no clear explanation, keeping its origin to herself. Breed quietly questioned whether this plan would truly work. In the worst case, he felt he might have to rely on the one he trusted most. He turned his attention to the dragon perched on a nearby tree and signaled that he was counting on him. The dragon was Odin, the black dragon. Odin was a quiet presence, rarely showing any expression. His strength alone was said to rival 1,000. His agility, combined with his sharp ability to read the movements of opponents, made him a formidable force. Among all, he was the one Breed trusted the most. Even in difficult situations, Breed believed Odin would find a way to save them. Odin gave a small nod in response before concealing himself completely. Silence followed. Breed reflected on how remarkable Odin's ability to erase his presence truly was. Vina observed that Odin's stealth matched her own skills in hiding, acknowledging how exceptional the dragon was. Breed agreed, recognizing that even among his dragons, it would be difficult to find one as capable as Odin. Still, he admitted to himself that this technique had been something drilled into Odin by their captain, not something he had developed alone. Vina then lowered her voice, reminding Breed that from this point forward, they were entering enemy territory. There would be no turning back. She pressed him to confirm his resolve. Breed answered, though with a slight hesitation. Above them, Odin spread his wings. They climbed onto his back, preparing to move. Vina gave the signal, and with that, they set off. After some time, as they moved through the middle of the camp, Vina quietly informed Breed that she would step in if he found himself in trouble. For now, he only needed to avoid making any unnatural movements. Breed accepted this and steadied himself. Vina observed that he still appeared somewhat suspicious and advised him to keep his posture straight. Even so, she noted that his core strength was impressive, to the point that no one would suspect he was carrying another person. Breed reflected that he had once carried an injured dragon before, which explained his stability. Vina then warned that they would soon encounter soldiers. Breed reminded himself to stay cautious and carry himself with confidence. As they continued forward, 2 soldiers approached and saluted him, assuming he was Vice Captain Blood. Breed responded in kind, urging them on in their duties, and they acknowledged him without question. Vina quietly questioned where his confidence had gone, prompting him to focus. However, his composure wavered slightly. In his thoughts, he struggled to concentrate, distracted by her constant whispering close to his ears. Vina continued speaking in a low voice, remarking that everything she had seen since arriving in this country had been full of surprises. Although the topic often revolved around dragons, she admitted to herself that she was not particularly fond of animals. What had intrigued her the most were the dragons, especially the flying one ridden by Princess Fiana. She found them fascinating, as creatures like that did not exist in her homeland. She also noted the variety of unusual beasts in the area, mentioning creatures such as tanukis. However, Breed found himself unable to focus on any of it. Vina added that she especially disliked dogs and made it clear that he should keep them away from her at all costs. In Breed's thoughts, it felt as though Vina continued on without pause while he remained tense and unsettled. Trying to regain control of the situation, he asked where he should head next. Vina directed him toward the fortress located behind the main cluster of buildings. Vina planned to plant bombs on the fortress columns. She instructed Breed to guide them there without drawing attention. Breed understood the weight of the task. If Dragonia managed to complete the fortress, there was a high chance they would launch an invasion on Levatin. He reminded himself that this mission was being carried out for Fiana's sake, and he had to see it through for the country. As they moved, a soldier suddenly called out to him, assuming he was Vice Captain Blood. Breed was caught off guard. The soldier, Vanya, greeted him and stated that he had come for training once again. He showed eagerness to learn under him. Breed felt a wave of concern. It seemed possible that this soldier was familiar with the real vice captain. He prepared to refuse, thinking of an excuse, but before he could act, more soldiers approached. They asked if the captain would be training Vanya and requested to join as well, provided it was acceptable. Vanya hesitated, suggesting that the captain appeared to be occupied. The others dismissed that idea, insisting that Vanya was only saying that because he had tried to get ahead of them. Another added that the vice captain was known for his kindness and would not turn them away, implying that he likely intended to train all of them. Breed realized they had completely misunderstood the situation. Internally, he began to panic. Vanya, however, took it as confirmation, believing that the vice captain would never disappoint them. The soldiers gathered, ready for training. Vina quietly remarked that they had been pulled into an unexpected situation. Breed whispered back, recognizing that this was not the time for such comments. By then, they had already reached the area near the fortress. The soldiers began counting down loudly, preparing themselves. Breed noted that they had been brought to the training grounds at the far end. With no other option, he decided to have them practice basic swings for the moment. While the soldiers focused on their training, Breed attempted to slip away unnoticed. However, just as he tried to leave, Vanya called out to him. Vanya approached him and asked for feedback on his form, hoping to learn how to improve. Breed felt overwhelmed in his thoughts, noticing how many eyes were on him. He gave a vague response, saying the form looked fine, though his tone lacked certainty. Around them, the soldiers began whispering. Some questioned whether the vice captain was acting differently than usual. Others pointed out that he had not been instructing them at all, unlike before, when he would be strict and precise. Breed felt his tension rise. Another soldier suggested that perhaps their vice captain simply was not at his best that day. Breed realized the situation was turning against him. Suspicion was building, and he needed to find a way out. Vanya then stepped forward again, asking for direct instruction. At the same time, he hinted that the others were underestimating the vice captain and that a show of strength would correct that. Breed hesitated but gave a reluctant acceptance. Before he could fully prepare, Vanya was already moving. He rushed forward, initiating an attack. Breed instinctively signaled for him to stop, but it had no effect. In his thoughts, he noted how little discipline these soldiers seemed to have, making him question whether they truly respected their superior. Realizing he had no choice, he braced himself. Behind him, Vina moved his arm with precision. Her gaze sharpened as she focused ahead. Breed tried to follow her movements, unsure of what she was doing. She began to guide him through a technique. It was Kazama's one-sword style, specifically the willow stance, floating fong. With that, they moved forward to meet Vanya's charge. Vanya reacted with shock as his attacks were deflected one after another. The surrounding soldiers watched in amazement. Vina instructed Breed to synchronize with her breathing. As Vanya pressed forward, the clash of swords echoed through the area. Then, with a smooth transition, she prepared the finishing move. Using Kazama's one-sword style once more, she executed a secret technique known as Fortress Slash. Vanya's sword was knocked from his hands. In the next instant, their blade was thrust close to his neck. Vanya dropped to his knees, visibly shaken, conceding defeat. The soldiers reacted with awe, remarking on how quickly the fight had ended. Some noted that the stance used was unfamiliar within Dragonia. Breed felt unsettled by what had just happened. He quietly wondered whether Vina would have gone as far as killing Vanya if he had not intervened. As he attempted to pull back the sword, Vina assured him that she would have stopped just before striking. Her confidence reflected her skill. Later, inside a tent, Breed let out a breath of relief. Vina embraced him cheerfully, noting that they had managed to get through the situation. Breed reflected that her methods were somewhat extreme. She then removed the helmet, mentioning that they had lost some time because of the delay. With that behind them, their objective remained clear. The next step was to head toward the fortress and plant the bombs. Breed caught sight of Captain Sarah, and his heart began to pound. Sarah approached and told him to come with her, addressing him as Blood. Breed felt a jolt of alarm, recalling that he was currently in disguise with a different face. Sarah mentioned that there was an important meeting scheduled for the day and assumed that he had already prepared the necessary documents. Breed reacted with uncertainty at the mention of a meeting. Sarah noticed the change in his voice and wondered if he was unwell. Startled, Breed claimed that he had a cold and was not feeling at his best. Sarah acknowledged it but explained that the higher-ranking officials were arriving, so she could not excuse him from attending. In his thoughts, Breed became convinced that attending such a meeting would only expose him. He needed to find an opportunity to slip away. As Sarah urged him forward, he realized that Vina was likely already working on planting the bombs at the fortress. Until then, he had to stall for time. He forced himself to think of a topic that might interest Sarah. After a moment, an idea came to him. He brought up the matter of using beasts in place of dragons. For a moment, only the sound of their footsteps could be heard. Breed felt the tension as Sarah remained silent. Then she gave her response. She made it clear that she opposed the idea. She had already argued about it with the higher authorities, though she was unable to defy their orders. Even the meeting they were heading to would mostly consist of those who supported the use of beasts. In her view, many of them were likely being influenced in some way, yet they remained inexperienced. She tightened her hand, holding on to her conviction. If they could persuade them, there was still a chance their stance might change. She placed her trust in Blood as well. Breed affirmed in response. In his thoughts, he recognized that Sarah truly cared about dragons. That realization worked in his favor. His thoughts were interrupted when Sarah expressed a sense of relief. Blood had always been quiet, which made her worry that he might have supported the use of beasts. Breed felt a sudden jolt at that. Sarah continued, reaffirming her belief that dragons stood above all, far beyond the level of those beasts. In Breed's thoughts, if Dragonia abandoned the use of beasts and returned to relying on dragons, their combat strength would recover. If that happened, there would be a strong chance that Levatin could come under attack. From that perspective, encouraging the use of beasts might actually weaken Dragonia's forces. The thought unsettled him. His mind felt clouded, and the heat only made it harder for him to think clearly. Even so, he chose to speak in favor of beasts, pointing out that they did have certain advantages. Sarah reacted with surprise at the shift. Breed quickly tried to support his point, noting that mole lizards possessed great speed. With proper handling, they could potentially change how battles were fought. Sarah cut in, pointing out their weakness in stamina. In contrast, dragons excelled in endurance. They were durable and capable of advancing even across harsh terrain without difficulty. Breed acknowledged her point, agreeing that she was correct. At the same time, he added that dragons were also highly adaptable. Each one had its own unique traits. He reflected that physical ability alone was not enough to judge them. Factors such as temperament, stamina, intelligence, and other qualities all played a role. A dragon master needed to understand these individual traits to determine whether a dragon was suited to a particular rider. He then recalled a specific example from the past, mentioning a dragon that had been too timid to fight. Sarah immediately connected the reference, recognizing that he was referring to Odin. In Breed's thoughts, Odin had now become a calm and dependable dragon. However, in the past, Odin had been completely different. Whenever a soldier tried to ride him, he would shy away. When faced with an enemy, he would turn and run. He had been timid, easily frightened by even the smallest things. Breed recalled how Odin had once been on the verge of being discarded. At that time, he had tried everything he could think of to help him improve. To him, cowardice was not simply weakness, it was also a sign of caution. By making use of Odin's wariness, he had trained him in various combat techniques, turning that trait into an advantage. As Sarah already knew, Odin eventually became a dragon that avoided injury and guided his rider with precision. A dragon once considered useless had grown into something reliable. From that, Breed drew his conclusion. Beasts could be handled in a similar way. In the end, it depended on how they were used. Sarah acknowledged the reasoning. Then, without warning, an explosion echoed through the area. She looked up as the sound spread. At the same time, Breed began to move. Flames rose, and fire engulfed part of the fortress. The beasts had been set loose, their cages broken, and they were now rampaging through the camp. Breed immediately understood what had happened. Vina had succeeded in activating the bomb. Now, with chaos spreading everywhere, it was the perfect chance to escape. He moved quickly, indicating that he would check the source of the fire while leaving the responsibility of giving orders to Sarah. As he ran, Sarah watched him closely. The armor he had been wearing began to fall away piece by piece. Freed from the disguise, Breed sprinted ahead. Then, without warning, Vina appeared beside him, acknowledging his efforts. Breed was caught off guard by her sudden presence. Vina responded with a light, playful tone, easing his concern after the tense situation. Breed responded that if anything, it should have been Vina worrying about him. Vina laughed lightly, noting that thanks to his help, she had completed her task without any trouble. She intended to report all of his contributions to Miss Fiana. Breed wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to steady himself. Suddenly, soldiers appeared ahead of them. The moment they were spotted, the soldiers raised the alarm, identifying them as intruders and moving to attack. Before they could close in, a massive claw struck down among them. A black dragon emerged. It was Odin. The soldiers quickly regrouped and gave chase. Vina remarked on how they just kept coming without end. She then pulled out a weapon, holding a pistol in her hand. She decided to hold them off so Breed could move ahead. Gunfire rang out, followed by bursts of explosions. Breed glanced back, concerned for her safety. Vina reassured him through her actions, showing no hesitation as she continued to engage the soldiers. He accepted it and turned forward again. Calling on Odin, he moved ahead as the dragon carried him away. Behind him, Vina let out a small laugh, thinking that the mission had gone more smoothly than expected. Still, she considered that it would have been better if Breed had already made his escape. Her attention shifted abruptly as danger approached. She barely avoided an incoming strike, jumping back just in time. Realizing she had let her guard down, she recognized that the soldiers had caught up once more. Even so, she remained confident, believing Breed would manage on his own. Meanwhile, Breed glanced back and noticed someone pursuing him. The figure rode atop a beast, closing the distance quickly. Their paths collided, and they tumbled as they came to a stop. The pursuer revealed herself. It was Sarah. In Breed's thoughts, the realization settled in. Sarah had already figured out his identity. She had recognized him not by appearance but by his voice. Breed reflected on how sharp her memory was. She was known for remembering every face and name of her subordinates with precision. Even so, he had not expected that she would recognize him through his voice alone, especially while he was in disguise. Sarah pointed out that it had been strange for Blood, a newly appointed subordinate, to know about Odin from the time when the dragon had still been weak. With that, she chose to speak directly and urged Breed to return to Dragonia. She held a high opinion of him. In her view, he had never complained about unreasonable orders. He had always worked diligently, striving to complete his daily tasks without neglect. Because of that, she wanted him back under her command. Breed found himself taken aback. He had never expected such an offer, especially coming from the captain herself. For a moment, he remained silent. Sarah continued, expressing that if she had known he would be dismissed, she would have done everything she could to prevent it. If he felt any obligation toward Levatin, she gave her word that they would not attack him. She was even willing to plead for better treatment for him within Dragonia. If he required anything, she promised to provide for him personally within her own household. Before she could go further, Breed stopped her. With restraint, he declined her offer. Sarah questioned his decision, believing the proposal to be more than reasonable. Breed acknowledged her regard for him and expressed his appreciation. However, in his view, her words were built on possibilities rather than certainty. They were statements of what she would do, what she would promise, and what she might change. For him, such assurances held little weight. He had often experienced people breaking even firm promises made to him. Yet, in contrast, Princess Fiana was different. That person had given him everything. When he had nowhere left to go, Fiana had given him a place where he belonged. Whenever others spoke against him, she stood firm and silenced those doubts. She accepted him as he was, even when he carried an unpleasant scent, never showing any sign of rejection. Because of that, Breed had pledged his loyalty to her. There was no chance he would ever betray her. Sarah paused as if holding something back. Then, she broke into laughter, catching Breed off guard. After a moment, she composed herself and admitted that he was right. A trace of self-awareness crossed her as she felt a sense of shame. She smiled, recalling what she had heard about Princess Fiana being a remarkable ruler with strong character. Even so, what she had just learned went beyond her expectations. Breed responded with slight unease, affirming that Fiana truly was a good person. Sarah then observed that Breed himself was kind. He had taken the effort to distinguish between her and the princess. Her tone shifted, carrying a sharper edge. From her perspective, his words implied something more, that if she truly meant what she had said, she should act on it. Breed struggled to find a response. Sarah raised her sword, a faint laugh escaping her as she dismissed any attempt at hesitation. To her, his stance meant that if she had time to speak, then she should simply take him by force, along with the dragon he held dear, Odin. Breed tried to stop the captain, unable to understand why she continued to pursue him. Sarah responded with laughter, finding his earlier words amusing. From her perspective, he had clearly implied that she should stop wasting time and capture him herself. Breed denied that interpretation as he continued riding on Odin's back. In his view, all he had done was express his loyalty to Fiana. Sarah reacted by swinging her sword, the force of it cracking the ground beneath him. She found it unacceptable that he would speak of the person he had pledged himself to without using a proper title, seeing it as a sign of how close they had become. In his thoughts, Breed realized that he had no choice but to keep running, even if it meant heading all the way back toward town. He apologized inwardly to Sarah and wished for her to stop, knowing that he had no intention of returning to Dragonia. Sarah, however, showed no sign of relenting. Breed concluded that reasoning with her was no longer possible. Acting quickly, he cut down a tree to block her path. Sarah responded without hesitation, using her mount to leap over the obstacle and continue the pursuit, moving from tree to tree with ease. Watching her movements, Breed sensed something unsettling. It felt as though she was deliberately guiding him somewhere, possibly trying to corner him and cut off his escape. He did not know the terrain well, but he took some comfort in having Odin with him. He relied on Odin's ability to sense danger, trusting the dragon to guide them safely. Odin became alert, focusing on their surroundings. Meanwhile, Sarah remained completely unfazed, maintaining her pursuit with steady confidence. Breed braced himself, anticipating that she might attempt something next. He urged Odin to push forward and create distance between them. As they moved ahead, the ground beneath them began to crack. Breed wondered if Sarah had been leading him toward that very location. Acting quickly, he directed Odin to leap from one boulder to another, continuing their escape. Odin might have appeared simple-minded at first glance, but with his current speed, clearing obstacles was effortless for him. In Breed's thoughts, it was clear that Sarah had intended to use the uneven terrain to close the distance between them. He glanced back. Sarah was already above ground level, keeping pace. She recognized that their movement was not lacking. She had expected that targeting their footing would slow them down, but that assumption had proven wrong. Terrain like this was not enough to hinder Breed's riding skills or Odin's speed. Even so, she had not exhausted her options. Another attack followed. The ground gave way as it crumbled beneath them. Breed reacted quickly, trying to evade, but the strike had been aimed directly at him. Sarah continued her pursuit without hesitation. Dust and debris filled the air, obstructing his vision. In that moment, he realized how vulnerable he was. From Sarah's perspective, there was no way he could avoid the next strike at such close range. Breed understood the same. There was no room to dodge. That left only one option, forcing his way through. Sarah observed this, believing that Breed had misjudged the situation. In his thoughts, he realized that if her attack had come even a moment earlier, he would have been in serious danger. The path to the left had been blocked off by fallen rocks, leaving only a single route forward. As he pushed ahead, something caught his attention. Ahead of him was a cliff. Sarah watched with a faint smile, recognizing that everything was unfolding as planned. The earlier attack had not been meant to strike him directly. It had been a calculated move. By dropping the rocks, she had cut off his escape path and used the rising dust to disrupt Odin's vision and sense of smell. Her true intention had been to drive him straight toward the cliff all along. At that point, the situation had already fallen into place exactly as she intended. Odin and Breed were now within Sarah's grasp, or so it seemed. Yet Breed urged Odin not to slow down. Sarah sensed what he was about to attempt and found it hard to believe. The thought crossed her mind that he intended to leap across the cliff itself. She recognized that even with their speed, such a jump should have been impossible. Still, Breed did not stop. As they approached the edge, words failed him. He shut his eyes for a brief moment, steadying himself, then resolved to go through with it. He trusted Odin and pushed forward with the decision. At the very edge, Odin leapt. They soared into the air. For a moment, it seemed as if they might reach the other side. The distance closed, but not enough. It looked like they would fall short. Alarm flashed through Breed. In that instant, Odin reacted. Using his hind leg, he pressed against the edge of the cliff and propelled them upward once more. Sarah watched in shock. The feat defied expectation. Crossing such a gap should not have been possible, yet they had done it. As she thought through what had happened, she realized the reason. A dragon with a keen sense of smell could perceive the terrain in detail, even from a distance. Odin must have sensed the exact positioning of the ground ahead. A quiet understanding formed in her mind. What she had just witnessed was remarkable. Odin's raw power, combined with his awareness of the land, had made the leap possible. Alongside that was Breed's composure and quick judgment, qualities that earned the trust of his dragons. Seeing this only strengthened her resolve. She now wanted Breed under her command more than ever. With that thought, her gaze shifted toward the beast beneath her. Sarah directed her attention to the beast beneath her, deciding that it was now its turn to jump. If a heavy dragon could clear the gap, then a lighter beast should have been capable of doing the same. She grasped the beast firmly by the head, urging it forward. On the opposite side, Breed could almost feel her presence reaching him even from that distance. The thought that she might attempt the jump herself did not seem far-fetched. When she became serious, there was nothing about her that felt restrained. Sarah pressed her foot down in frustration, coming to a realization. Beasts failed to respond when it mattered most. Despite the advantage she had held, she had not managed to capture Breed or Odin. In the end, she chose to stop her pursuit for the day. She fixed her gaze on Breed, making it clear through her actions that their next encounter would not end the same way. With a faint laugh, she turned away and pulled the beast along, urging it to move despite its hesitation. On the other side, Breed finally relaxed. The tension left his body as he realized they had made it out. In his thoughts, he acknowledged how close the situation had been. If Sarah had been riding a dragon instead of a beast, she would likely have stopped him without difficulty. Dragons, with their keen senses, would have made escape far more difficult. In the end, he had only managed to get away because circumstances had favored him. That, to him, was the true strength of Dragonia's Dragon Knight Captain. The thought of facing her again weighed on him, and he could only wish to avoid such an encounter in the future.